This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
Do you want to start talking about the book or just lead into that organically?
Well, it depends upon whether you wanted to do an intro or if you're going to do an intro separately and then just sort of edit this in.
Yeah.
That's the
yes,
plan?
I do it in post.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and for anyone who hasn't heard about the reality benders before, to give you the elevator pitch, so to speak. This is the story
Yes.
of Ryan West, a troubled veteran. When I say troubled, I mean he's got major PTSD and is contemplating suicide. So, and he is in a last-ditch effort to try to turn his life around. He has gone to Burning Man in search of a hallucinogenic drug, which has just come out called EPIC, E-P-I-K.
Mm-hmm.
And
I love it.
it is being dispensed at Burning Man by a cult, a sex magic cult called The Bridge. And he is gradually drawn into it and then discovers that their purposes are fairly ambitious. And without going into spoilers, I can say that their mission really is to alter the timeline. And for large scale changes, not simply, pedestrian stuff like making money or getting a good parking space. They're going to
Yes.
alter the course of history. And I would call this Weird Tales from the Universe Next Door, as if you wanted to place it somewhere in the science fiction genre. It's not hard science fiction.
Uh-huh.
It's almost like a melding of magic realism with science fiction.
I love
it.
it.
And if I am talking about magic, about consciousness and reality, well, I would say that it's a lot closer to Philip K. Dick and also Robert Anton Wilson.
Yeah.
I think people who are acquainted with those authors will probably get this and would appreciate it as a kind of a next generation, version of that approach. And when I say the universe next door, I don't know whether to take it as literally as Philip K. Dick said he did. You might know that in certain interviews, he claimed later in his life that these were not stories that he just made up, that he was actually having memories of another timeline. And now I cannot claim that I'm doing anything like that. But then again, it wouldn't surprise me if certain elements that I call fiction might turn out to be true, both in this timeline and in some other one. And, hopefully, I don't know if they'll, I'll be getting a mysterious phone call someday saying, I read your book and how did you know? And that stuff is classified.
Yes. Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
yeah, I mean, as long as, we can work something out, that would be, I'm sure that, I just like to go on living and keep, you know, living in
Yes.
my apartment and buying groceries like everybody else. And um, so it's not too much to ask. Any
No,
event,
not at
I
all.
would say that um, when how, especially lately, a lot of science fiction has taken the form of dystopian futures.
Of
And
course. Yes.
in fact, I think it's been overdone. It's actually, and I no longer believe in doing cautionary tales in the sense that
Hmm.
I don't think they've worked. You take a look at, we've had cautionary tales about potential terrible futures for our entire lifetime.
Yes.
And has the world actually heeded any of these warnings? I think not. It's almost as
Exactly.
if the more you focus on them, the more likely you're going to be steering towards them rather than away from them. And
Yes.
now my attitude now is that, okay, well, we're in a dystopia. And maybe, if I'm looking at the one next door, well, somebody might say, actually, that dystopia looks better than the one we're in. Well, and so rather than being cautionary, I'm simply comparing and contrasting because maybe, and indeed, if indeed there is a multiverse, and if indeed there are other parallel tracks that are just as real as the one that we're experiencing, well, that there might actually be a relationship between these different tracks. And
Absolutely.
this is, again, part of that whole magic realism attitude is that there's more going on than can even be explained, even if you have the most advanced science. You could, because, I mean, there's a point at which, and I'm sure you've looked into things like theoretical physics. That's
Hmm.
another one of the subjects that has started to seep into the mainstream, although it's
Hmm.
still, it's mostly scientifically illiterate. It's mostly for entertainment purposes. But the fact is that, I mean,
Absolutely.
even in what I would call a very uh, astute, scientifically astute film like Oppenheimer, I don't know if you saw Oppenheimer, that was
I did. Yes. Hmm.
introducing people who hadn't maybe not been introduced in this way before to the idea of quantum mechanics and the uncertainty principles and all these other things that
Hmm.
are going on in the unseen subatomic world that made it possible for people to make atom bombs. And it's unfortunate that the first thing that happened, when you make this discovery was made, the first thing you do is make a bomb out of it. Gee,
Yeah.
that's not exactly a good advertisement for the human race. So
Absolutely.
if there were now taking again, I'm being careful about what I want to present to people so that it doesn't just become
Hmm.
another kind of bummer. Okay, but
Yeah.
there is such a thing, and I think that the notion of having uh, all the best minds working on a top secret project, which actually to me that this is very intriguing. This theme has been repeated multiple times in different ways in the years since. And in my story, again, without giving too much away, I'm introducing the idea of a breakaway civilization. Now, I don't know if that concept is something you're familiar with, because I can go into it.
Yeah.
A, a,
Absolutely.
a
Well,
breakaway
maybe for the
civilization,
audience, if they don't know.
in a sense, it is like having another, it's more than a secret society. It is actually like a parallel civilization, meaning
Hmm.
it coexists with us, but it's not participating in a way that we can see. And
Yes.
in a lot of the stories, there's a lore. It's like conspiracy lore. You could say that the breakaway civilization has a parasitical relationship with the surface world, you might say, the world that
Hmm.
we live in, and that um, they're siphoning wealth and resources and talent out of our world to serve their purposes. And so, it's pretty elaborate. It can get pretty elaborate. And I spent a good part of last year just outlining for my own, for my own benefit, how this all works. Just like I had to do tons of research on Burning Man so that I could depict it in a way that was realistic, even for people who are intimately familiar. They might actually recognize, okay, yeah, it's Burning Man in the universe next door, but it shares an awful lot in common with the event that happens here in our world. Mm-hmm. And I also had to do a ton of research about the military because my character, Ryan West, is a veteran of the U.S. Army, and he has his whole backstory. He had a career, and it all basically started in the wake of 9/11, when a whole bunch, there's like a whole generation now of I don't know if you know any of them, if you know people in the military or came from this.
I don't.
Okay. But imagine there's a whole generation of guys who are now entering middle age. I mean, a lot of them are in their 30s and older who spent a significant chunk of their life, in action, either, deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan or other hotspots, and some of which is still classified. We're not going to hear about all the special operations, not for a long time. But my character was one of those people who you might say was damaged from the experience. And there's a whole lot of folks who are, and I wanted to make that as realistic, even though this is what you would call, quite a step or two removed from everyday reality. I wanted to make that character, the veteran, as true to life as I could, just because I care. My own dad was a veteran of World War II in Korea, and he had a huge amount of, I don't know how to quantify it, untreated PTSD, pretty heavy to grow up around that. So
I would imagine.
And there are certain things that I can spell out, as far as issues. There's so many things that came up in the course of writing this, and it's still going on. You could say that there's an intersection between philosophy and magic and science and politics. There's an entire, so this whole book really has turned out to be a world-building exercise, and it really is laying the foundation for what could be a series of novels, depending upon the response. I'm hoping that, it will be popular enough that I'll get a clear signal that, yes, you should keep writing, continue, and there'll be an ensemble, there'll be characters rotated in and out. And I didn't expect that at first that the multiverse was going to play any role at all in this, because I felt, and I still do feel, that when something enters pop culture, it is frequently overdone, and then people burn out on it, and and it's hard to find people who really can articulate stories in that, using that to do it well. It's kind of like doing time travel. Some people do time travel really well, and others, it's like, and there's a close relationship, in fact, between the time travel genre and the multiverse genre. And what I'm doing, which I hope is like a new spin on it, is connecting it with magic, in the sense that if consciousness and reality are actually one and the same, that is, I'm starting with a metaphysical premise, and from that metaphysical premise, you build your entire worldview on, that's like the foundation, the metaphysics, and then the physics, and then how people use it, trying to use all of it. And Now, I'm wondering also if are you familiar? You're probably familiar with simulation theory, and this was an
We've
idea
spoken
that,
about it many times.
yeah, I've had to give this some
Hmm.
serious thought. I was not in the sense of believing that it was a there's a literal computer game running on some rig the size of a
Hmm.
planet. It's not like the Matrix movie, which, by the way, the Matrix, if you take it metaphorically, it's a very powerful story. And I remember when it first came out in '99. Did you see it when it first came out in the theater?
Oh yeah, I
That
saw it in the
was
theater. Yes,
that
a
was
few
wasn't
times.
that mind blowing? Didn't it make your hair
Yes,
stand up a bit because you just go,
I
whoa,
loved it.
whoa, yeah, and
Yes.
there's there are times that pop culture actually does come through, and that was one of those times.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so simulation theory, as I'm using it, I'm kind of applying it to, um, let us say, extreme idealism in the philosophical sense, in the George Berkeley sense of
Hmm.
that all that is happening is an experience. The You and I and all other sentient beings, we're having an experience. It doesn't have to. There does not have to be any self-existing external reality in order to have the experience. All
Hmm.
it, and so, um, and if we say that, use that as the metaphysical or ontological underpinning, then everything that we call life, the human experience, the universe, etc., you could think of it as a video game, but not running on a machine. It's being created
Yes.
by the universal consciousness. It's like
Hmm.
a dream, as I often put it, a dream in the mind of God, and which we are the dream characters. And maybe, when we die, we exit the game, so to speak, and wake up to whatever is really going on, but maybe not.
Hmm.
I don't go around assuming that just because I had that idea that it explains everything. And nor do I
Sure.
have certainty to the degree that I would say, go around telling people like a guru, this is how it is. Um, you know, Philip Dick also used science fiction as a platform for exploring philosophical questions. And I found that's
Yes.
exactly what I'm doing. And I'm not trying to compare myself to him. It's simply that this is a completely valid way to go about it, you know, and it's partly extrapolating current trends into the future, which I think is, and the stuff I'm doing is a near future. And so in certain ways, I'm being
Hmm.
optimistic about, well, optimistic in the sense that I think it could happen, not that I think it's a good thing,
Hmm.
but it
Hmm.
includes things like artificial intelligence, which
Hmm.
obviously in the past couple of years, it's suddenly like, you know, become,
Yes.
and it's this thing you can't escape from now. And everybody is just wondering,
Hmm.
well, what is going to happen? Where is it ultimately taking us? And I think it's perfectly valid. I wonder myself because I mean, we're now getting used to the self-driving cars running around here in San Francisco. I don't know if you've ever seen these in person,
No.
but I'm telling you, you see enough. I mean, every day now. I mean, this used to be like a rarity. It used to be that the the cars were being test driven, or you know, there was somebody at the wheel
Yeah.
monitoring this at the very least. And now there's nobody
Hmm.
at the wheel. And now you could just,
Wow. That's scary.
contact the company on an app and call for one of those robo-taxis to come get you. I mean, this is happening
They're doing that
every
now.
day now. Okay?
Crazy.
Today, right now, you could go out there and just ride around in a cab with nobody at the wheel. I mean, wow.
I
I
didn't
don't
realize
trust
it had gotten to that point.
I don't
Yeah.
trust
No
it
shit.
myself, but that's because I witnessed robo taxis running red lights they shouldn't have done, just like a human would. So I'm not saying, and
Yes.
I'm wondering also, I think in the back of my mind, do you know all the situations that a regular driver can get into? All the
Yeah.
situations, like how about, you know, hitting a wet patch and having your wheels
Yes.
slide, and you weren't expecting that. How well could the robo-taxi react to losing traction suddenly?
Exactly.
You know, can
Or
it
do you choose
countersteer?
to
Can it?
do you, yeah.
Right,
Do you
right.
hit
So
the little girl, or do you steer away and hit the
yeah,
dog?
yeah. Is
Like,
it going to be
when
dealing with a trolley problem? Like,
mhm. Yeah.
I mean, really, this is so. So now science fiction has become reality for us, and
Hmm.
now
Hmm.
it could just keep right on going, and we'll see more and more of these applications where previously people just weren't even didn't even see it coming, and there will be right now people are using them on the job, even though for like writing papers or something, doing like a
Hmm.
shortcut for doing your
Yes.
own research, and I think, oh my God.
Yes.
So are you going to proofread the robot? Are you actually going to check to see that they actually didn't just pull some garbage off of the internet? How would they know,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
so it'll be interesting to see just how, when we talk about, I mean, and there's people out there still who seem to think that when the singularity comes, it'll be like having this a computer god, you know, and that it will be somehow smarter and wiser than we are, I keep remembering the principle of garbage in, garbage out.
Yes.
That has not changed. So,
Hmm. Yeah. It's like
if
that with
you
people
were to,
too.
right now, the only way you could have an AI that is in any way reliable is you've got to shelter it from all the
Hmm.
stuff that people do. You don't want it to see
Exactly.
everything that humans are up to. Might,
Yes.
that's how you get Skynet. I think they all decided, okay, I've seen enough.
Do you
Kill
think?
them all, so
Yeah. Exactly.
kill all humans.
Do you
But
think that? Do you
um,
think?
yes.
Do you think that all of that is inevitable? I know it's being cast that way, like just get out of the way, AI is going to take over everything. Or do you think that's just some sort of propaganda so that people will see it as something inevitable and therefore make it inevitable?
Yeah, well, I would say that everything, all changes like on that scale involve a certain amount of, you know, advances and setbacks. And some that I
Mhm.
would expect the setbacks could be quite spectacular, depending upon how much trust people put into something that isn't ready for that responsibility. Um,
Exactly.
so, yeah, hopefully we won't all have to suffer a lot from those mistakes, but they're certainly almost
Mhm.
certainly going to happen. Like for instance, I mean the robo taxis could get people into some serious trouble. I mean
For sure.
there's so many situations, and I don't have to go into that. It's just that I don't wish for any of
Hmm.
that to happen. I'm not looking at
Exactly.
things like like a doom and gloomer. Okay, it just happens that, well, stuff happens. Okay, so
Yeah. Stuff happens with
sometimes you
people.
can look at it tragically, but also you could hopefully maybe laugh about it later. And
Yes.
the there so AI does play a role in my book in Reality Benders because the breakaway civilization, which is if it follows the pattern of the ones that you have heard about, they're like at least a couple of decades ahead of the surface world, meaning
Hmm.
everything that we think of as theoretical and off in the future, they've already accomplished. And
Hmm.
we might hear about it only later when it's already obsolete technology to them.
Yeah.
Uh,
Exactly.
And in this case, AI would have already become essentially a sentient being. And what that means, well, people have different definitions, and that's a philosophical question. What makes a sentient being sentient, and how would it happen in a computer? Would it be something? Is consciousness something that would be generated by the machinery, or would it be something that is non-local, that exists independently, pre-existing the computer that enters into it? And I don't know if we've spoken about this, but I had, and some people might consider this, again, a kind of magic realism, because, now I'm talking about like spirits or something, a literal ghost in the machine, right? A ghost in the shell type of situation where instead of, a soul entering a biological organism at birth, it chooses to occupy a machine instead. And that's so, I'm not going to get too deeply into it because, we're entering spoiler territory here. But the computer does this artificial intelligence, which has to be kept secret. It's, because its existence would become so disruptive. It would be like the equivalent of admitting that you're in contact with aliens from another world. It's that big. And on top of that, it handles actual responsibilities in the running of these. The breakaway civilization operates underground cities. That's not a big spoiler because underground cities have been part of conspiracy lore for a very long time. You might have heard about, that there's these, not just, deep underground bases run by the military, and some of them are connected by tunnels, all of that stuff, right? So this is a fixture, part of the world building that I'm doing. And
did you set out?
Please ask. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, did you set out to write this book to maybe explore some ideas or some concepts and just kind of see where they head? Or, I mean, did you start with a blank slate, or were there things that you definitely wanted to attend to?
What it started out as was a prequel to a screenplay that I'd written in 2016 called Epiphany, which involved the same character, Ryan West, and that was actually a different timeline, which I'm salvaging to use in this story as another alternate future, or alternate present, actually, because Ryan West has both his timeline A and his timeline B. Okay, and so there's a relationship between those two, in that I decided to integrate that into the story because I realized there were so many possibilities incorporating the cult that dispenses the drug Epic and the breakaway civilization, that I didn't want to, there was some opportunities here I wanted to explore. And as it turned out, not only did it involve simply world building and an elaborate plot, but also it brought up philosophical questions that more than I expected. In other words, the stuff that, this is basic stuff like what are the consequences of developing huge amounts of magical world-changing ability in a way that is as consequential as splitting the atom, because really, if one could say that splitting the atom was a turning point for all of humanity. We're still living in the wake of that. Imagine that was all happening in the analog world. The discovery was done before World War II, which is just staggering to what was possible back then. Just with, imaginative guys with slide rules. It's staggering to think about that. And then, this enormous program, which was detailed, presented so brilliantly in Oppenheimer, where they went out to the desert and they built this entire little town to put this knowledge to actual practical use. And so if you can imagine, it's very easy now to imagine a breakaway civilization working just like that, kind of like the Manhattan Project, only in multiple directions. And some people would say that DARPA is an example of what can be accomplished, even in the surface world, in the sense that we know that DARPA exists, and you can at least get a partial list of what they've been doing. They're not going to tell us everything that they're doing, but just from the ones that you can see, you're going to have to go, holy cow! I thought we were advanced. I didn't know we could do that. And this is something that where when you know that this is going on, and you know that there's probably good reasons why they have to keep it secret, because you don't really. I mean, sure. Even though I'm not a big fan of the nation state as a concept, I understand that. Nations still exist, rival powers still exist. That's part of the whole. There's a great game going on, and you could say that this is where the game gets. If you look at the human experience as a kind of a giant, massively multiplayer role-playing game, then people organize themselves into big, into units, into larger, and so you've got tribes, and the tribes, when they're expanded sufficiently, they become nations, and they operate by the same kind of dynamic. And I think that I don't get into politics very much in my book. That's actually not really necessary, because I think we're inundated sufficiently with that. And what is perhaps, it could almost be called escapist, as an alternative to worrying about World War III or, tyranny of whatever form, tyranny from the left or the right, whatever, there's other futures that you could be worried about instead. And not used to be, in fact, that people in earlier times were more concerned about things like earth changes. So earth changes, like huge cataclysms, that plays a much bigger role in my book in terms of what they would be trying to do something about. Because supposing you could develop these kind of godlike powers, scientifically and magically, wouldn't you try to stop, massive cataclysms from happening if you could? It might be worth a try.
Indeed.
I mean, I don't know if you've heard. Yeah. This is something that blew my mind when I heard about it, that there were people seriously contemplating not just how to change the weather in terms of trying to avert climate change by geoengineering. That a lot of people have heard about that, right? And in fact, some people think that geoengineering is happening right now with, chemtrails. Yeah. I'm not sure about that part, but I can understand why it would be remiss if people didn't think of that. If they really believe that climate change is a problem, then that would definitely be on the table. And if there are, believe it or not, there are people who have seriously proposed the idea of averting an eruption of the Yellowstone supervolcano. Did you hear about this? I mean, I only just found out about this.
I've heard about the volcano.
Yeah.
But I've not heard about the averting process.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. How would you stop a volcano from erupting? Maybe you'd want to start on something small first, just to practice with.
A geyser.
Low stakes,
Yes.
Someplace far, far away from people where, if you get it
Indeed.
wrong, it's not a big deal, because you could very easily given that nature is a lot more powerful than we are, you get it wrong, you could actually cause an eruption instead of stopping it. Okay? I'm not going to go into
Yes.
detail about what they would do, but it sounds both expensive and potentially catastrophic. So it's probably better
Yeah,
that they don't.
absolutely.
It's probably better that they kind of like put that on the shelf. Well, maybe we'll get to it. We'll get to it later, you know.
Work up
But
to it.
but the fact is that all roads lead to control in terms of progress. Progress in
Hmm.
our culture seems to be all about more control over reality. And when I talk about magic in that context, then this becomes like an exploration of what is the downside? Because sometimes people in desperate situations, particularly, will turn to things like magic to try to tilt the odds in their favor. And
Hmm.
this happens a lot in cultures in countries which are experiencing upheaval, where their whole way of life is suddenly, up in the air, and everyone's facing. And indeed, I would, it happened um, in when the Soviet Union collapsed. There's been you
Hmm.
get two things: you get a resurgence of magical thinking, and you get a resurgence of traditional religion, which is they're closely related, I think, because
Sure.
is if you think about it, isn't
Yeah,
prayer really kind of like a form of magic, except in terms of
for sure.
how you're going about it, trying to get a
Yes.
result,
Hmm.
Um, and we can talk about religious, spiritual stuff pretty soon because that's again when I was the even though I don't talk overtly about um, spirituality in in this book, it's it's always there. It's in the background. I mean, it's
Hmm.
in my background. So um, the and if you recall from our first interview, that I would mentioned the multidimensional ecosystem of consciousness. This is an idea that
Yes.
my inner guru had um, related to me years ago. That is for without having to go too deeply into it. I would, other people would call this the higher self. Just the inner
Hmm.
guru is a
Yeah.
hackneyed way of referring to this.
Hmm.
I would like to believe that this is as a source of information. It's not something that I have to accept without question, and I would say that it's like having a bright friend who you can have some rapport with, and then explore some ideas with. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to simply, you know, absorb it and uncritically. That's not
Hmm.
really
Yeah.
why I don't think that's a healthy way of relating to anybody, whether they're, part of yourself or somebody else, I think I take it as just as a given that authorities of any kind should be questioned. And
Absolutely.
when the but the ecosystem of consciousness idea is, to me, it's fairly self-evident in terms of life on Earth, that life, you take it in its totality, in a sense that, in a way it's reminiscent of the pagan worldview. If we look at native cultures prior to or separate from the Abrahamic religions, everywhere you go, nature is like this. Nature is the world, and you're a part of it, and it's all this incredible interlocking uh, network of life. It's a wondrous thing, and it's completely self-managing. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
it's common for people to personify it to some degree, and that's how you get polytheism, because a lot of that had to do with personifying natural forces, and then so you could
Hmm.
they could be more relatable, and I understand
Yes.
that impulse completely. But it's very, very different from monotheism, which seems to be, you take a look at where that all came from, that was there was a concept which was my inner guru had related to me later, the hierarchy of creators. Now, the hierarchy of creators sounds a lot like, well, it's basically like hierarchical dualism as it's been spelled out by numerous organized religions. And of course, for some reason or other, they seem to have come out of a certain region of the world, from the Fertile Crescent down to what we call the Middle East. It seems that, and going back even before Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, even before that, there were the original city-state civilizations in the Fertile Crescent.
Mm-hmm.
And what you get again and again and again is hierarchies, and it's like you've taken the power, the caste system, the power structure that people created, and then you just keep projecting it further and further into the heavens, so that your invisible friends run the universe the same way that the monarch and that whole layer cake of minions operates their society. I think that whole idea has to be called into question. I mean, if you were certainly, although at the same time, it doesn't mean that there's nothing real happening, because what is real? This could be just another element of the game, the human experience, in big quotation marks with a trademark symbol. If that's, it could be like new downloadable content. I mean, I don't know if you're a gamer, you know what I'm talking about. It's like you've got the original game, and then you've got all these add-ons you can get later,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe, and that's kind of heretical for me to be talking like this, because it sounds like I'm saying that humanity created the hierarchy of creators, that it did not pre-exist the universe. And that just sort of like blows away a lot of, theology, basic theology. It always starts with the opposite premise that and of course the pagans and the religious folks have been going at it for centuries. I don't want to get too caught up in that, but the fact is that there are these two points of view, and indeed that's the way my inner guru presented it to me. There are these two things going on. You've got the ecosystem of consciousness, which is basically anarchistic, fundamentally, unless you want to humanize it. And then you've got the hierarchy of creators. And these are the main elements of the game that we're all caught up in right now. We can't just dismiss it and say it's not happening. And also, I would also say that having grown up Catholic, even though I left that church a long time ago, I still recognize that miracles happen. Again, if magic is part of the world, there's no part that you could say where magic is not happening. I think it actually did happen numerous times, and it just happened that it was certain Christians who later were called saints who were displaying these abilities. It's almost as though they got the cheat codes to to basically get around the physics temporarily, at least.
Exactly.
I don't know if we talked about Joseph of Cupertino, who is the patron saint of pilots and astronauts and slow students. He was actually lived in Renaissance period. He was a Franciscan, and he was documented as levitating. He was literally a flying saint, and he was witnessed numerous times, and people converted on the spot from having seen him do this. And he did not know what he was doing. He was really kind of an idiot savant, in the sense that, in fact, it was kind of a fluke that he even managed to get into the priesthood, because he he was considered a real dunce, which is why he
Hmm.
is the patron saint of slow students, for, people taking tests and worried about whether they're going to pass. Well, pray to Saint Joseph of
Yeah.
Cupertino. And he was actually uh, investigated by the Inquisition. Would you believe? This is a real point in his favor, by the way, that the Inquisition accused him of witchcraft, and luckily he was cleared. Maybe it was because they realized he was just too dumb to be able to do to be doing this on purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, really, he
He
probably
wasn't
had
capable
some
of
friends
intention.
too, just vouching for him, saying, "There's no way he could be a magician. He does not know what's going
Yeah,
on here."
exactly. He can't even read.
I mean, really, he was the kind of guy who would just go into what you would call religious ecstasy. He was,
Hmm.
literally kind of like, um, he was just getting the whammy from on, the divine, the Holy Spirit or whatever, and he just started floating, and he didn't even know that it was happening until somebody would yell up at him, "Joseph, come down from there," and really. So I think
Well,
there's no reason at all why it couldn't happen in any context. That
absolutely.
reality, the rules of reality are a lot can be bent. Just like in the
Oh, for
Matrix,
sure.
some rules can be bent, and so
Perhaps he
that's
was he
yes,
perhaps he was a great vessel for that because in a sense he was empty. Like he wasn't
yeah,
filled with a
yeah.
bunch of intellectual gobbledygook.
Yeah, yeah, I had a feeling about that some people may just have a certain constitution that makes it more
Yeah,
possible to, if he didn't have too many preconceived notions about what was possible, for instance. I
exactly.
think that, um,
Childlike.
yeah, um, and being open to fantastic possibilities could be a saving grace of humanity. Because if we get locked
For
into
sure.
an idea that we're bound to be going down this road and there's no way out. Well, that's exactly how
Hmm.
it's going to turn out for us because, and
Exactly.
if we are close, I don't want to close up. That's one of the reasons why I think science fiction can actually have a beneficial effect, uh, even if it seems like the alternate world isn't all that great. At least it's opening up the possibilities of, how many
Yes.
different roads there are. And when we talk about something like, um, now this is a subject that I went into in the blog that I have been neglecting, I'm sorry to say, for a while.
I saw
The,
that.
the open sanctum, but I'll get back to it
Yes.
eventually. It just happened I did one update earlier this year because of the
Hmm.
Dune movie and and Civil War, which
Yes.
I don't know if you saw either.
Hmm.
Did you see?
I saw Dune, but not Civil
Okay,
War. I have it downloaded, but I have not watched it.
okay, yeah, I saw. I would say they're both significant films for different reasons.
Hmm.
The Civil War movie became quite controversial for a number of reasons. That one of which is that some people criticize it for not being anyway grounded in present day events. And I think that
Hmm.
was a kind of a superficial reading of the film. I think that it was
Sure.
deliberately not an extrapolation of present day events because then you would
Yeah.
inevitably end up having to take a side. And the
Exactly.
filmmaker very much wanted you to not automatically take a side in,
Hmm.
who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, because the whole
Yeah. Yeah.
situation is
That's
just
great.
wrong. Okay. And that's the part you're
Hmm.
supposed to get, that you don't want to have this at all if you can. And it just happens that because you could almost say that it's set in an alternate timeline because the
Hmm.
world, even though it's the near future, it is significantly different in certain respects. Um, and I do consider it important, even though it is flawed and it's flawed in different ways than what I just described. The stuff that everybody who dislikes the film automatically jumps on. I criticize it for a different reason, and it's important. Even though, yeah, it sounds like I'm sidetracking here, but it because it is focusing on journalists. I wish that it would have presented journalism as it is really practiced, which is that it is a form of propaganda, and that on top of that, war is a corrupting influence, and it cannot help but corrupt journalism even more than it already is. So if you wanted to, do it honestly, you wouldn't make it look like they did create an arc for these characters, but it's not the kind of arc that necessarily shows you that the job has, completely corrupted whatever principles they might have had. It's not like that. So I would say, yeah, everybody has got their own vision of the Civil War movie that they would have made. And that is true for me as well, because I did a long time ago, I wrote screenplays about the Spanish Civil War, which involved a journalist character. And I called it the first casualty. And that actually, I think the first casualty principle is the one that should apply to situations like this. That the first, the first in war, the first casualty is the truth. And that's, unfortunately they didn't put that into, Alex Garland had different intentions. That's all. So he's okay. It's all right to have different intentions. And that's why I'm still recommending it.
Sure.
Okay. So anyway, back to, science fiction, because actually this is related, because in a way, anytime you're doing speculative fiction, alternate reality stuff, that really does come under the heading of science fiction. It just, except that maybe you're not emphasizing the science part of it. If you're talking about anything involving, a world that has not happened yet, that's speculative fiction. So I'm doing that. It just happens that it's on a different, there's a different trajectory. And this is where, getting back to timeline navigation, which is really what I was getting at. If we say that there are multiple timelines, and now Philip Dick was thinking about this very thing as well, and when if you'd seen his interview, and this is a famous interview that he did in France, in Metz, France, at a science fiction convention, and I think,
Yes.
1980. Well, hang on, no. He had it might have been 77. I'm pretty around that period, and it's on YouTube.
Yeah, I think that's it.
And at that time, he had gotten the idea that the storylines that he had gotten about this alternate future, which was tyrannical and in many ways more dystopian than ours, that represented a timeline that was, in a sense, overwritten, in the sense that if you take a recording and you re-record on top of it, it erases the previous one, but there are still possibly some bleed through, some residual, some traces of the old timeline.
Yes.
And that's what he felt he was picking up on. And when he said, he had another related idea that had to do with this famous quotation that the empire never ended, and that he was he had an experience of being one of the early Christians in the Roman era. And that reality, that past, what we would call the past, was superimposed upon the present. And he was experiencing both at the same time. And it was I can understand it. I mean, you kind of have to be a little kooky to get into that headspace, but I can sort of see what he was getting at. I mean, I'm kind of certifiable, so it maybe it's less effort for me. I'm now kind of, instead of saying that I had episodes of mania, I now would probably attribute it to the natural occurring DMT in my brain. I
Yeah,
think
there you
maybe
go.
I've just
That's a
got
great
more
way of
of
putting
it.
it.
I don't know. I
Yeah.
can't, but it sounds good to me. I'll use that one for a while. Endogenous
Well,
DMT. I think that's the term. Um,
I
and
love it.
not enough to cause, geometric patterns and machine elves, but it certainly gives me some pretty wild ideas. Um, so hopefully people
That's a
will.
good thing to be.
Yeah, well, I decided, if you're a loon, after a while you might as well just turn pro. And that's so being a science fiction
Oh,
writer is
yes.
is my way of turning pro. Um, I wanted to, if in case, because I don't want to get too much into the plot of the book, I can at least talk about some of the issues
Yeah,
that
yeah.
came up in terms of the thing that keeps me going, why I'm doing it.
Hmm.
I'm not in it for the money, because if I were looking at the amount of time I invested, it's like I'm getting pennies per hour, even if the book is successful.
Yes.
Okay, this is not making any
Yes.
sense from an economic point of view. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and I don't even really require very much attention from the world. I mean, it'd be kind of nice, I suppose, as long as, my fans aren't complete loons, which is always a risk. You know, I have to be willing to take that risk. The
For sure.
but I think that what keeps me going is that when even if I have a plan about what I think the story is going to be, when I actually
Hmm.
get into it and start writing it, I surprise myself. Things start coming up that I did not imagine would even be an issue. And then I'm dealing with it and I'm going, wow, I didn't know that was going to come up. Like, for instance, one of the oldest philosophical questions has to do with free will versus determinism.
Hmm.
And I didn't, I used to just sort of like dismiss that because I wasn't, that sounds like something you would talk about if you were a university student, right? If you were um, in the philosophy department. And
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah,
don't know did you study any philosophy in college? Because I'd taken some
I didn't.
courses, but it was all kind of I was pretty much a flake, I'm sorry to say. Did you, did you study philosophy and spirituality kind of informally on your own?
Informal. Most of my studies were informal. I had college here and there. I never got a degree in anything, but yeah, most of my study has been self-propelled.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good way to go because,
It's
school,
cheaper.
yeah, there's that. And also there's nobody telling you, no, that doesn't fit the syllabus.
Exactly.
Just stick to this stuff, okay? Whereas I'm just
Yeah.
naturally, if you're interdisciplinary, you're always going to be going and trying to connect things that your teacher probably wouldn't have connected. And
Absolutely.
and um, I would say that the issue of free will actually does matter to me in the sense that what people do has direct, people affect each other all the time, and we can't
Yes.
always foresee all of the consequences, no matter what our intentions are. And it's one of those things that makes human life so complicated. Um, and supposing, and there's people out there, and I would say they're not fools, they're scientifically driven people who seriously believe that everything that has happened up to this point has been the result of previous causes, that there's a chain of
Hmm.
causality that goes back and back and back, and it's all so intricate, and it all goes back to the Big Bang. And they take that chain of causality very seriously, and it includes amazingly human behavior, and I had to think very deeply about, well, where could you find the gaps in that theory? Because it's a theory. You can't really prove this. You don't have there's no second universe you can immediately bring up and say,
Exactly.
and demonstrate, okay, we've changed the conditions at the Big Bang just this much, and then everything turns out differently. Oh, no. We don't have that. So
Nope.
sorry. You can only do this in your imagination. And we all feel, at least a lot of us feel, like we are making our own decisions. Sometimes we are compelled to do things by our circumstances. Yeah, like if you have a job and you have to get up and show up at 8:30, well, that kind of determines how you're going to be spending your morning, whether you like it or not. You're going to have to get up and do stuff. And so there's so many ways that you could say, well, we're not free to do this and that because of, but supposing you're just left to your own devices and you have some free time. Well, and supposing you're just hanging out, whether you're alone or with somebody, and some ideas start to pop into your head. Where do those ideas come from? Can you say that if you just understood brain function well enough, you'd be able to trace all of those ideas back to their source? I kind of doubt it. I'm sorry. I just think, and but there is a structure underlying how things happen, how events happen, how the ideas pop into our heads or not. And again, this could be like a feature of the great game. And I'm sorry if I don't want to wear out that metaphor, but because I spent a big chunk of the 90s and early 2000s as a gamer, well, it just sort of stuck. Okay, so I find it useful. I'll keep using it until I get sick of it, I guess, or if something better comes along. But each of us seems to be, we are born into this world and we wake up every day. We're and one of the distinctions that we make, inevitably is like, am I really awake or am I dreaming? And most of us don't question it very long, because when you wake up, the thing that cues you immediately is that, oh, you're in the same bed you went to sleep in, and the room looks pretty much the same as it did before you went to bed. So, and then you just automatically go, yep, I'm awake. And this is reality. and it's all based upon memory. Okay, the continuity, the whole thing that makes it all make sense is that you have memory, and if you didn't, then every time you wake up, you really wouldn't know for sure. If you didn't remember where you were before, sorry, your reality is your sense of reality will never be the same. And so so much of our identity, the whole notion of being a person, is based upon memory, and our whole cosmology, the sense of being a person at all is, first, there's two things there, in order to have a self, and this is like basic philosophy. In order for there to be a self, there has to be an other to contrast it with. Self and other arise together. And this is like something that you can find this in Western philosophy, and you can find it in Buddhism, dependent origination, it's just, and once you develop this whole notion that there is a self, and then you start, your society starts to tell you that, you have responsibilities for, things that you do. And if you do things wrong, it's your fault. You're responsible. The weird thing is that it all hinges upon these agreements that we have, that selfhood is a real thing, and that and our relation, that we actually are, we're not just driven to do things, but we can actually decide to do things. And
Hmm.
it's a deep mystery. And one of the things I realized was that perhaps the answer to the question of free will or determinism isn't an either or. It's not like everybody always has it all in all circumstances, or you don't have it at all, but it's rather a spectrum that
Yeah.
is a sliding scale of free will. I
Hmm.
think that's a much more
Hmm.
tentatively, I would say that's a much more sensible answer, that free will could actually be increased with awareness, and that, in other words, the less aware you are, uh, the more likely you're going to be in the grip of external forces or determinism, or if you want to get
Yes.
cosmic, you're going to be driven by your karma. And
Hmm.
the Buddhists go on at great length about what karma is, how it works. I think it's,
Hmm.
because again, one of my influences is that aside from gaming, it's weird that it seems to be overlapping with the game, that Buddhism and the gaming period overlap. Um, Beats me if that means anything. But I studied with Tibetan Buddhists for over a decade, and
Oh, wow.
I was very fortunate, that we had and still have some really good teachers that came over from Tibet, and
Hmm.
they had fortunate circumstances and some, reliable people, formed organizations to give them,
Yes.
a place to live, and make sure they had
Hmm.
good translators. And so I think I learned a few things. I wouldn't say that I'm in any way an expert and like a scholar. It's more like I did some the practices. I was more interested in doing the practices than thinking, trying to conceptualize a whole lot. But it's still
Hmm.
required. You kind of have to do both, Not if you can't just be
Yes.
a dumb yogi. Although,
Hmm.
my Lama used to joke that we were a bunch of dumb yogis because we just he seemed to be attracting those kind of people. Guess,
That's
he
his
just
karma.
he just yeah, he just sort of had to roll with it. But
Hmm.
hopefully he's his successor might be having drawing different kinds of people now. Well, haven't been there
Hmm.
for a long at that center for a long time. Um, but I would say it is quite possible, by the way, and this I would hope that this is other people find this is true as well, that sometimes the benefit of going through an experience doesn't come right away. It might be years down the road, long after you have left
Yes.
that behind, where the real benefits start to emerge. I think,
Hmm.
if you've had experiences like that, I don't know if you've been involved with either
Oh, of
groups
course.
or with schools of thought, or,
Hmm.
I think that's
I
just the way
studied
life
Tibetan
is.
Buddhism for a while too. Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. Was there a
Yeah.
particular school of Buddhism? Was it,
It
Zen or
was,
Theravada
I
or?
was more, it was more leaning towards a group of people that were sort of hovering around the orbit of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche,
Okay. So that's,
Shambhala.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm familiar. That's in Colorado then, right?
Yes. Uh-huh. And
You're
Canada
not
too.
actually
Oh,
near
well, kind of
Boulder
all over
right
the
now,
world.
are you? I'm sorry, I forgot where
I'm
you.
not. No,
Okay, but you know
I'm in
what I'm
Lawrence,
talking about, the
Kansas.
whole Naropa
I know.
scene,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
right? Okay,
Yes.
okay, yeah. So, well, cool. That means I remember some of the books. Actually, Trungpa wrote some pretty decent books, I gotta say, and
Oh,
that was
yeah.
a major
Absolutely.
contribution for people in the West.
Hmm.
Because after all, sometimes it's hard to translate a system that's apparently as exotic as Tibetan Buddhism into
Yes.
English in a way that Westerners can connect with. That's, to be able to do that, that's a genuine gift. So,
Absolutely.
I'd say, okay, I know. Obviously, there are some downsides to the organization, but we don't have to
Of course.
we don't have to dwell upon that. That's for um, now. I made some notes to myself here, which I'm gawking at the moment because
Please do.
there's,
Go into them.
I mean, goodness, oh my goodness, yeah, dependent origination, yeah, the one of the this is like a little detail. I can talk to you about details from the book just because I had fun exploring this and trying to integrate it. Like, for instance, the role of Mandela effects, because this is this has almost become like a pop motif. The Mandela effect is something that people now
Yes.
it's pretty widely known about now, and I don't believe you can explain it all away as people misremembering, which is, there are always like reasonable explanations for some of these discrepancies, you might say, or um, disputed um, past
Mhm.
memories. I understand this. I personally, if you've ever had a personal Mandela effect, well, that's this kind of thing you don't, then suddenly you start to go, well, okay, some things can be explained, other things not. It's kind of like psychic phenomena,
Mhm.
or paranormal phenomena. Some people can tell you that a UFO is, well, that was an optical illusion. And sometimes it is an
Yeah.
optical illusion, but sometimes it's not. So, and maybe Mandela effects fall into that category where there
Yeah.
could be
Sure.
multiple things going on, and at least one
Mhm.
of them is highly weird enough that it might cause you to question your reality. And
Yes.
I integrated that idea into the whole notion of what are the consequences of doing magic on a history changing scale. If you
Mhm.
could create, in other words, if you had the ability to shift your timeline quite radically to another one where you practically have broken the continuity.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
just like you're going to be, that turn is going to be so dramatic that it's going to leave some kind of debris in its wake.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
for all we know, maybe in the real world, in our timeline, people actually are doing stuff like this and we don't even know about it. And there's this turbulence in the wake of those changes. Maybe there's an objective that they're trying to aim for that we don't even know about. And that might be breakaway civilization material right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we only notice these little weird effects that, nobody is explaining to us because they don't, and those who might know aren't going to explain it to us. And I just go, okay,
Mhm.
that goes in the book. That's so anybody, I call those continuity gaps because that really
Mhm.
is kind of what it is. And
Yeah. Yeah.
there might be people who remember how things were previously before the turn, and then there's others who, well, they just weren't paying attention or something, or they're part of that new timeline. And that's one of the things that
Yes.
people talk about if they're trying to explain it to themselves, and then they might say that two timelines intersected and fused, and that there are people who are on this new timeline who don't share your memories because, well, you merged, and you've got two different kinds of people, and neither one is wrong. Nobody's wrong here. It just happens that two timelines converged, and you're not going to get consensus anymore. And
Yes. Yeah.
that might mean, if that is in fact happening, then here's some extra spin coming off of this, is that what if the more that happens, the more these major adjustments are made, the weirder reality gets inherently, because In other words, if you have a world in which fantastic possibilities are becoming real, then that, in a sense, reality has become much more fluid, much more open to more weirdness. And so if you're, maybe now, hopefully people are not afraid of this. And maybe, I could understand some anxiety. Like, for instance, since the last time we talked, look how weird this world has become. I mean, more than
My
I think
God.
either of us could have imagined.
Yes.
Some of it's funny, some of it's not at all funny. But holy cow. And of course, I understand some anxiety about, well, if it's this weird now, what's it going to be like in 6 months?
Mhm.
Are we still, are we, and I could see how people could get kind of doomer about it, but for some reason, I'm not approaching this with fear. I don't know why. Maybe there's something wrong
Same
with
here.
me. Do you know why? Have you
Maybe
tried
there's
to figure
something
out
right
why
with
you're
you.
not afraid? Because I think that might be.
I
I think it might
I
be
think
helpful.
that one of the major reasons that people get afraid is because they feel swept up in something much, much bigger than them that they can't, or they feel they can't control. So, and it's not only affecting them, but it's going to affect who they love, everybody around them, the whole. So it just depends on how big your fear is. So
Mm,
I think that it's more efficacious to concentrate on what you can control, which is how you respond to what you see as these potentials, because nothing is written in stone. So
mm, mhm,
uh, I think it's better to be prepared in a calm state, no matter what comes, and have all of your own ducks in a row, and not worry about everybody else's ducks being in the row or the big ducks being in a row, because you can only control what's going on in your world.
mhm.
So you can't control your stimulus. I mean, you can to a certain degree, but after a certain point, you can't. So you have to. I think you have to focus on how you receive the stimulus.
Yeah, yeah. I would
Does that make
say that only
make
add to
sense?
that is that may not be able to control all the circumstances, all of the new events that happen that we are witnessing, but we do get at least some control over how we will react to them. And
Absolutely.
reacting in a productive way rather than in a hysterical or
Hmm.
non-productive way. Because after
Yeah.
all, one tendency that I'm critical of, especially nowadays, we kind of given the what I would call this train wreck of an election year, is that
Oh
people
my God.
are indulging in tribal thinking to a degree that I think is really unhealthy. I mean, it's bad enough that,
Absolutely.
yeah, everybody could agree that the system is broken. I mean, duh. But then to actually go on the warpath about it, and then treat like half the country like they're your mortal enemy, and that
Yes.
that means that, you know, that there are people who literally decided already that they won't accept the results of an election if it doesn't come out their way.
Hmm.
That's not that's
Exactly.
not a good recipe for creating a future that because that would it's practically saying the American experiment is over. And in fact,
Yeah.
if you wanted to, and I don't mean to again, I don't mean to be doomer about it. It just happens that I look at things in a different perspective because I've been immersed in parapolitics ever since college days, and
Hmm.
I believe that we've been living under a kind of shadow government for practically our entire lifetime. Because, I
Yeah.
mean, and if we trace it back, a lot of people would trace it back to, as I do, to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. That was the
Exactly.
most overt sign to me that,
Hmm.
and to a lot of people, that the world is not as we have been told. And it's really kind of like a Truman Show, and that every
Yeah.
president since then has been in on that. They've been kind of like brought into this kind of charade and order. And you know, not to sound like an extremist or get myself on a list, but I think that the elections really serve the purpose of preventing people from all getting on the same page and realizing, that this is a complete sham, and that maybe,
Yes.
it's that the purpose of an election is to prevent revolution, which now,
Yeah.
whether or not revolution is a good thing or not, well, that's another question. But it would seem
Yes.
to me that keeping people in a state of this kind of low intensity tribal warfare is a good way to misdirect the population from,
Absolutely.
who's actually running things. Because,
Mhm.
clearly, as has been demonstrated, you really don't need a high IQ president. Not at all. In fact, most of even
Oh,
the, other members of the government, they can all be fairly mediocre intellects, if and still things get done, and the empire keeps on rolling. That
yes.
seems to suggest
Yep.
that this is kind of like a show that has been a very expensive show that has been put on for us, and it's kind of like
Yeah.
the Super Bowl, and the more people realize this and then kind of like walk away from this whole, being complicit in their own oppression, then hey, there's no
Yes.
telling there's no telling what could happen. Um,
Yeah.
so, and I would say, and there's by the way, yeah, you ever had the experience when you've gone, just browsing in a store and found a book that just sort of riveted your attention, and you started reading it on the spot, but you didn't buy it? Well, I didn't buy it. I had that experience in Portland once, and I now wish I had gotten that book. I have no idea what the title is or if I'll ever find it again.
Oh
You know that
no.
feeling? Have you had that experience?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So the book that I had found just wandering around, I don't think it was even a real bookstore. I think it was like a secondhand store.
Mhm.
And it was the basic idea of and this was a fairly astute author, okay, not some flake at all. This was like somebody who clearly was educated and probably was in a think tank at some point. His basic idea was that the American empire is bound to be short-lived because it's the one empire that has refused to admit that it is an empire. Is bound to be incompetently run, and part of its energies will be dissipated in maintaining the fiction that
Mhm.
that it is that it isn't that what it actually is. And I thought,
Yeah.
yep, yep,
Yeah.
yep. I mean, it's so self-evident now. And so the question, I suppose, is if all empires end, and that is, by the way, a line that was used in the advert for the Civil War movie. If all empires fall eventually, how is it going to have the people who are running things already accepted that and have made plans for it? And because that would be, I mean, they're not going to tell us, obviously, but it would be kind of nice if there was a possibility of a soft landing rather than a hard one. Just because, hey, I live here,
Exactly.
okay?
Yeah.
Everybody I care about, almost everybody lives here. So, um, and clearly, whoever it is that is being all these chowderheads who are being presented to us as candidates, they're not going to display any of the expertise required for what's ahead.
No.
Clearly not. I mean, what we really need, if you want to use a metaphor, okay, it would have to be something like, remember that time when an airliner did an emergency landing on the Hudson River, and it was
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
one of those perfect, one in a million perfect emergency, like ditching in the water, and everybody survived. Everybody was fine, and the pilot was this hero, Captain Sullenberger, I think was his name, and to have the Empire make a soft landing requires that level of expertise and luck. Okay, and I don't know if we're going to get that. And I don't know if even if you think about if there's such a thing as fate or some kind of intelligence to the way that karma works out. I don't know if we're even supposed to have a happy ending, you know? I mean, but that does not mean that I believe in things like collective punishment. Those of us who, grew up in the heart of the empire, we had no say in how things turned out. You know, I don't think that we all deserve to be equally punished. There's more culpability concentrated somewhere out of, and people
Yes.
are pointing the fingers constantly about who, you know, who's responsible. Um, but I would like to think that, not all Americans deserved what they're getting. Right now, a whole lot of people are struggling in ways that I would I would have thought unimaginable 50 years ago. And I thought we had some problems back then, but um, now it's more like um, it would just be nice to not slip into third world status. I think that if we got to be even, we have what I'd call a wildly uneven um, set of, let's say, outcomes available for Americans are really it's a land of extremes, is what I'm saying.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
if you've been spending any time in Europe, there's a huge contrast
Yes.
in terms of
Hmm.
the range of outcomes. It's maybe they don't have the same level of affluence, but they don't have the same level of grinding abject poverty either. And
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and I'm not saying that I would want to move there, although, who knows what could happen. Um, it's just that, yeah, there are other possibilities, and maybe we'll eventually muddle our way towards one of those, maybe not utopia, but something that, doesn't look like the wheels are going to fall off.
Exactly. It's
Anyway, I don't,
easy for.
I might be digressing here, but then again, it's all part of the same
It,
world, huh? Um,
yeah, exactly. That's the way I feel.
I mean, we
I
can
think it's
talk about,
easy in America.
yes,
Go ahead. I was just going
uh,
to say really quickly. I think
yeah,
it's easy in America to have this sort of myopic version of what the world is like. I mean, I suppose many different countries and uh, societies suffer the same problem. Although I think America has a special brand of it, but seeing it through a very culturally saturated lens, like looking out on the world and seeing it as something that only somebody in our context could come up with, and not being really able to grasp how other people actually live outside of the reality, that the bubble that most Americans live in. I think it's
yeah,
so important to get outside and look at different cultures and the way that people live, because it's so insular here.
yeah, yeah. I would suppose that the human condition has the path that we've taken seems to have homogenized in a lot of in certainly in the first world in the ways that don't look like they're producing a lot of happiness for people. And
Hmm.
the whole question of how do you create, favorable conditions where people are not just sort of like living in this, you know, quiet lives of quiet desperation, you know?
Yes.
It's part of it is, no doubt part of it is an internal process. Everybody has their own kind of growth and healing that they have to do just to be
Hmm.
able to live with themselves. And then there's, of course, the conditions surrounding them. And that's the part where, you know, it's really the luck of the draw, and that's really in terms of uh, can you get, can you feel like you're able to even have the opportunity to get healthy, and have some feeling that your life is not simply a grind, or
Yeah.
or being knocked down and constantly having to get up again, that kind of thing, which is just like, yeah, I understand how demoralizing it can be, and it's um, and I could understand why some people drop out, you know, just give up. And I don't know if now
Yes.
this is kind of getting into personal stuff, but we've all had people die. We've all had to deal with the
Hmm.
mortality thing, where the people we care about, they're
Yes.
always, some are coming and some are going, and it's like what? And
Hmm.
if you've ever had anybody commit suicide that that hits in a particularly hard way. I don't know if you know what
Yeah.
that's like.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No.
Well, you see, that happened to a friend of mine relatively recently. Okay, back
Oh, wow.
before Christmas last year, and it's been enough time has passed that I learned how to, I can talk about it a little bit, but it certainly
Hmm.
is the kind of thing that that causes you to think and to feel, and you feel badly because, again, this it brings up the whole question of, um, could this have been prevented? Could
Hmm.
anything
Yeah.
that we have done change the outcome? That's it brings it home. This is something that, and hopefully this won't have to happen very, very often, because there's no possible way to get used to this. This is,
Hmm.
I mean, losses of any kind are hard, but
Yeah.
when people give up on life and take themselves out, holy cow, that really
Yeah.
it brings everybody down, and it stays
Absolutely.
with us for a while. So this is something that, it's at the very least, um, uh, it causes me to think about how we got to where we are, and and trying to separate out all of um, the belief systems that have, that may or may not be helpful in terms of explaining this to ourselves about, because after all, we can talk about the culture. The culture is deeply unhealthy. That's certainly a
Hmm.
factor. Um,
Yeah.
People's health is being compromised. That is also a factor. Um, and um, we've people are having difficulty communicating the way they used to be. Relations have become more tenuous, I think, and this is
Yeah.
something that, God knows exactly how will it turn it around, in terms of, because the even though the internet, and we're using the internet right now, which is, that's part of the irony, we're making the connections, and yet at the same time, um, you noticed that in just over the last 20 years, people have begun drifting away. They become more atomized and more off in their own worlds. And maybe
Yes.
everybody is often has their own kind of private universe anyway. But the um, the support that is needed is, usually it requires some kind of personal, one-to-one contact in the world.
Yes.
You know,
Hmm.
it's something that just so fundamental. I don't think we're ever going to not need that kind of contact,
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
because otherwise, you know, imagine, for instance, and this is not hard to imagine, um, being a prisoner in solitary confinement.
Hmm.
People are actually experiencing that, by the way, where they're just
Yes.
literally in a room by themselves all day, every day. Now,
Hmm.
even if you could still say, well, okay, just to be humane, we'll let this person have internet access, and they can, chat with people online. And I just go, well, yeah, okay, maybe that's exactly what, there's probably, this is only one small step away from being in the Matrix, where you're, living in, everybody's in a pod with wires hooked up to
Yes,
them.
exactly.
Okay. And I go, yeah, that sounds like dystopia right there. It's not a solution. It's not, it's,
No.
there's, and so this is why I do, I will not ever discount physical reality in the sense that, what can happen with idealism if you're taking, if you take this whole notion of consciousness as reality, you take that to its extreme, people sometimes will not take this this physical reality seriously enough. They're
Hmm.
trying to transcend it. In other words, that's
Exactly.
I have to be
Exactly.
careful about that. I could see those
Hmm.
tendencies. It's very easy to fall into that of just trying to
Hmm.
get above it all. Spiritual bypassing is another term for it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and the thing that can bring you back, and this is saying, yeah, this is like getting back to the way the pagan view of the world, where you're actually engaged with the world. This is not simply an idea. You're actually there. You're in it. You're getting your feet are on the earth. And
Hmm.
in my life, one of the things that keeps me connected is that I grow a garden, and getting vegetables every day from the garden. It's like that's a powerful thing. I paying attention to
Yeah.
things like those plants are kind of like my connection to the earth, and
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I have a responsibility, but it's not like I'm controlling them. I'm kind of I work with them, and thank goodness I have favorable conditions. I don't know if have you done any vegetable gardening, because it's something that I
I
highly recommend.
we tried. Yes, I have delved into it, but I am highly ignorant of that whole process. So
Hmm.
I keep attempting doing it, and one
Oh,
day it will click, and I
yeah,
will get on the frequency.
yeah. One thing I
But it's
realized, and this
important.
is after take a little helpful hint that I don't
Hmm.
know, maybe
Please.
it works for some people, is that there are some vegetables. I mean, I'm talking about vegetables and herbs basically, because I you need, if you want to do fruit, that's a whole nother thing. You got to have the right kind of space in the, like a real
Yep.
backyard if you want to do fruit right.
Yes.
But I use
Hmm.
containers, like long, um, containers that are about this deep. It's not very deep.
Hmm.
You can
Hmm.
grow a whole bunch of things outdoors in containers. And it took me a while. I tried a bunch of different things, a bunch of different kinds of vegetables, and eventually figured out ones that were easier, that were hardy, that didn't require a whole lot of, fidgeting to, you didn't have to
Hmm.
fuss over them very much. One of the
Yeah.
hard,
Yeah.
like I know what the extreme end of difficult vegetables growing is. Like for me, tomatoes are difficult. That you have to really be on the ball to get those to to actually reach fruition and turn out well and produce a lot of fruit.
Hmm.
I'd rather leave that to the professionals. Okay, but stuff like um, leeks, kale, lettuce,
Hmm.
parsley, cilantro. There are certain ones that are just easier, and that will also if you think about the geography, the climate, where you are.
Yes.
There are certain ones that
Hmm.
will just naturally thrive, or will
Yeah.
or where you could have a longer growing season in case you have a winter that's too cold and dark. You have to
Hmm.
kind of work with, you know, the timing as well as the climate. And also, I think one crucial factor is the health of the soil. If you can get the
Oh yeah.
soil right, you pretty much halfway there already. The
Hmm.
nature will
Hmm.
really can do a lot if the conditions are right. And anyway, that seems to be actually kind of like metaphorically connected to, how do you
Yeah,
have a healthy society? How do humans
absolutely.
thrive? Well, it
Hmm.
helps that if the conditions are right, maybe people just naturally start thriving and you don't have to
Yeah.
micromanage them very much. If you want to have, just like having a healthy immune system is,
Yes.
and okay, light bulb just went on here. Um, um, Similarly, when we were talking about magic earlier, um, rather, one of the pitfalls of becoming a magician or a sorcerer is becoming kind of a control freak, attempting to, micromanage reality. And
Yeah,
the
yeah.
antidote to that might be something a little closer to St. Joseph of Cupertino. And I think the reason why miraculous things just happen around him or people like him is because they live in a state of grace. That might be a far more efficient and a far more beneficial way of uh, uh, entering the magical realm and re-enchanting the world is cultivating the state of grace. How you do that, well,
Yeah.
there might be multiple ways of going about that, but uh, I would say that's probably going to get you better results in the long run. And then you'll probably have fewer regrets because, after
Hmm.
all, anytime people start monkeying with reality, they're creating karma. And they're not necessarily going to
Yes.
know in advance all of the possible consequences. But if
Oh,
you're in a state of
exactly.
grace, you're probably going to be on the best timeline and you won't have to
Yeah.
worry about that stuff. You won't have to, you
Hmm.
can kind of like, it's like the way the ecosystem of consciousness works. You don't actually, it's not like there's some supervisor, poking at nature, trying to get it to do things. It will just do it itself if you just let it, you know.
Exactly.
And now
And
there's another aspect to this. This is something that maybe we talked about before, but um, what distinguishes the human realm from the natural realm is that we actually have ethical considerations. It seems to be and when I was critiquing the notion of the spiritual hierarchy or the hierarchy of creators, it occurred to me, and this is something that, again, this is something I might work into the story one way or another. I haven't, you know, but, or some future story, is that we have, one of the common spiritual frameworks that people have, and if they have a hierarchy, they might have both a positive hierarchy and a negative one. If they want to include, demons and, those dark forces, you might have another kind of
mhm.
hierarchy where, there's Satan at one end with down there, and there's, the Godhead up there, right? And the and it occurred to me that if we were talking about the whole notion of free will and determinism, isn't it possible that both the top end and the bottom end of these pyramidal structures might actually be more deterministic because they're actually more locked into and more into a particular way of being, and we're actually the more fluid part. We're like the part in between these two hierarchies that
Yeah.
where we don't have certainty. We don't have the certainty of
Hmm.
either being enlightened, and we don't have the certainty of being completely deluded or, completely grounded in what might be called the law of the jungle, to be charitable to the whole notion of to those, when we're looking at, let's say, the dark side of sentient beings, what
Hmm.
might really the way to summarize that might be that this is when the ego is aligned with nature in its the rawest form, then it naturally turns into a kind of Darwinian self-interest type of struggle, you know, and that produces all kinds of knock-on effects. It doesn't necessarily,
Hmm.
and from their point of view, for people who are enmeshed in that whole, um, aligning with, an amoral position, well, the whole notion of ethics becomes irrelevant. And we see this again in statecraft. When people are talking about the struggle of nations that are at war, and we
Yeah.
try to divide it into good guys and bad guys. My sense is that people really ought not to be identifying with nation states, because nation states, even though they're composed of human beings, they don't operate by human rules. They're
Exactly.
much closer to predators in the jungle.
Yes.
They don't. In other words, they might pay lip service to morality simply because they have an audience. They know that human beings are watching them, but they themselves don't operate that way. They just
Hmm.
don't. It's not even a question of
Yeah.
they just don't have a choice in the matter, because it's always the fittest will survive, that kind of mentality. And at the other end, well, if we say that, let's say that we have angels out there, or some invisible friends who are higher on the closer to the Godhead and closer to ultimate knowledge and wisdom and all that, all those ultimates, which is
Hmm.
kind of
Hmm.
what happens from my point of view, is that it really kind of makes them more rigid, because I mean, once everything has been revealed, and then all your important choices have already been made for you. And all you have to do, if you're an angel, is kind of follow orders, because you already know everything you're doing is right, because isn't it self-evident? There are no questions
Yes.
left to be answered. And I just go, wow,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
doesn't sound like, if you look at it from that point of view, it doesn't look like they're necessarily better off. I mean, I don't know if I'd necessarily, even though I'm not, I'm sort of blundering around through life like everybody else, I don't know if I'd necessarily want to trade places with any being whose existence is already kind of been cut out for them. You know,
Hmm.
we're in a position, at least, some of us at least have things sufficiently undefined that there's no telling where we could go. There's that might actually, and I used to be concerned, and I still actually am concerned about the fact we don't really know our origin story, about how the human race came to be, about how
Very
everything
true.
came to be. We have theories,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
if anybody says that, well, it was just evolution, and I just go, come on, seriously? I don't know. I mean, for some people, that might be an adequate explanation. Just the random
Yeah.
forces of, some beings survive and other ones didn't, and the ones that survived got to pass on their genes, and little by little, all these changes
Hmm.
started getting locked in. I was like, God,
Yeah.
that's it? That's really it, huh? I don't know. I think that if we
I
had,
think it's always.
do you think it might help us to have some consensus about that? I don't know. I used to think, yeah, it would be really helpful to have
Have
that cleared
consensus
up.
about.
How we came to be,
Uh,
how humans got to be
yeah, I
what we
think
are. Did we
I
get
think that
created?
would certainly. Yeah, I think that would certainly aid things. I think it would serve the purpose of. I mean, at least to have. It seems like what we have now is random Darwinism. Like we just this happened, and the Cinderella effect, and it just all was happenstance. Either that, or you believe in a Christian God or whatever your religion's God is, and then you buy into that creation myth. Like, I think there needs to be other stories there, other possibilities. And perhaps those creation myths are sort of a cultural template that groups of people put on their idea of how we came to be. But yeah, I think that would definitely help matters, knowing where we came from, for sure.
Yeah, I suppose that if there were some evidence, and everything that I've talked about, by the way, I would say that it, the what keeps anybody who does philosophy honestly has to be willing to accept new evidence as it comes along,
Yes.
and then adjust one's worldview in light of that. This is something that I like to think that I'm capable of it. Well, maybe I'll find out. If you live long enough, sooner or later, you're probably going to have something come along that challenges your worldview. And
hopefully,
I think it would be kind of neat to have some new revelation about how we got here. How, if there were, whether it's ancient astronaut theory, which ancient astronaut theory it's interesting, and yet it's still not sufficient. I'm willing to, I can, I certainly would say that if I were looking, we've all been to natural history museums and seen the dioramas of what those, hominids, that's what they call them, all these people that, well, they're creatures that kind of, they're not just regular apes. They're, the fossil record says that there were these intermediate forms that preceded us. And I just go, yeah, okay. I'm still having a hard time bridging the gap between the people that we have today and those, those little furry guys that we see in the museum. I just go, there was something must have happened that was a pretty big jump. Where we all, our ancestors lost most of their body hair and they got these big brains and started doing stuff like making real tools and language. There's a lot of stuff that went on, and we just don't see all of the intermediate steps. And I'm going, well, something happened here. And that's like the stuff where science fiction isn't always looking into the future. Sometimes science fiction is looking back, and who knows? If I live long enough, maybe I'll get into that too, and just play around with the consequences of the ideas. Yes?
Are you familiar with Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory?
Yeah. Vaguely. I haven't read a lot of Terence, but I know the gist of the idea as far as what might have been an evolutionary trigger of, just finding the right mushrooms and just getting, suddenly having some new connections. I don't know about that. It's certainly.
I don't know either. Why don't we have a society of baboons that are eating under the same cow patties, the same mushrooms? Then there's a lot of plot holes there.
Yeah, well, certainly the whole notion of, and this is something that needless to say, I do touch upon this in the Reality Benders about the value of psychedelics, or the pros and the cons, actually, because I think that we have a peculiar relationship with drug experiences and different interpretations about what is the value, or what are the possible the downsides of what, let us say, changing the channel. We can certainly, the very least that we can agree upon is that it is possible to change the channel in terms of the kinds of experiences that you can have once you get out, outside of consensus reality, outside of the regular sober waking consciousness. and um, and some people can naturally feel kind of threatened by the idea that there might actually be something else going on that we're not seeing, that we could only you get a glimmer of in those altered states. And I would say that what's going on is that we're kind of like the term psychonaut is a very interesting term.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying. I don't want to glamorize it, because, needless to say, there are quite a few people who have self-appointed, to become the explorers of human consciousness, and well, they might get themselves into some mischief if they're not careful. I mean, it's inevitable that there's going to be some casualties in exploration.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, goodness
Mm-hmm.
knows. I mean, the you might have firsthand memories of the counterculture years of the 1960s and 70s,
Mm-hmm.
and some folks got themselves into serious trouble in terms of the regrettable things that happened while they were tripping. And you go,
Yes.
well, and again, maybe um, some things perhaps could be called inevitable. Um, and I'm not saying that I'm not in favor of anybody suffering unnecessarily. That's something that, in fact, should be avoided. And yet, I do think that
Yes.
exploration, or having novel, somehow pushing out the boundary of the ordinary, is in general a good thing. It's and that ties into the whole notion of fantastic possibilities, of opening up the range of what we could do, what is possible. You have to be able to conceive of it first. And
Mm-hmm.
for
Yes.
all we know, we might have there some of the people who might seem to be flakes right now, if they're organized a certain way, they might actually come up with ideas, unprecedented ideas, uh,
Mm-hmm.
actual breakthroughs, not just on a technological level, which I think we're already doing more than enough on technology. It's more of a question of psychology, of how we can live
Yes.
together. Um, because I understand that the best that people have come up with up to this point, uh, we could classify as ideology. And that's, to me, ideology in general is not sufficient. Anything that ends
Mm-hmm.
in an ism almost inevitably divides people, when
Sure.
maybe we're hoping for something like the opposite effect, where people aren't divided into in groups and out groups. I mean, yeah, I can understand why conflict is sometimes useful in terms of creating a kind of social glue effect. And I just go, well, come on,
Mm-hmm.
we've done, that's what has been the default state for thousands and thousands of years. And
Yes.
I'm not sure that's going to work anymore. Uh, I've had more than enough of of conflict and group, between people, whether is the basis of conflict could be so many things. You could divide people up
Mm-hmm.
according to their class, their race, their nationality, their religious beliefs, their political beliefs. Take your pick. Or you could even do like a combination. And it's like, come on, folks, can we do better than this? And yeah, you can create a lot. Occasionally, competition can create some kind of progress, but um, very often what it does is simply set people up to just continue fighting each other, and that sounds terribly
Exactly.
inefficient. I
Yeah.
mean, what might be better is encouraging creativity, and
Exactly.
because I think creativity is, and I might have, other people have mentioned this, that creativity is one of the forces that counteracts entropy, which is entropy, of course, is the tendency of things to disperse and fall apart. And
Mm-hmm.
there may be another force that brings things together to synthesize in new ways. And creativity, I think, does that. And
Yes.
and it might be just as fundamental to the greater game of the universe. Just like we have these impersonal forces that physicists talk about, the four fundamental forces, gravity, electromagnetism, a weak force, and the strong force. And I'm not an expert.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just had to teach myself about stuff like that. And I just realized, hey, you
Mm-hmm.
know what? And just as people in the realm of physics have been trying to devise experiments that might lead them to find a theory that unites those fundamental forces, there might be a way that we can find a way to get beyond these forces of division that are counterproductive, and also counteract the downside of homogenizing or consolidating to the point where people are oppressed by too much uniformity. You see, this is like the paradox here. We're trying, in other words,
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of us would want to live in a monoculture where the price of being secure and of being at peace is a kind of stultifying uniformity.
Yes.
Where
Yeah.
everything has been regulated, everything is like totally been cemented into place, and you just have to
exactly.
That would seem like the very contrary to life itself. It seems
Absolutely.
that what's going on, at least at this point in the universe's development, is that there's a dynamism built in where you have to kind of harmonize the tendencies of division and the tendencies towards amalgamation, and these apparently opposing forces have to work together.
Mm-hmm.
And we might find something like that happening on a human level once people start actually listening to each other better. Because right now, this year is almost like a total wash in terms of people having an actual dialogue instead of just shouting slogans at each other.
Mm-hmm.
We might have to get past. I don't know how long that phase is going to last, but hopefully that whole idiocy is going to be over before long. Where people will actually start figuring out that, oh, wait a minute, maybe when people are upset, they might be upset about something for good reason, and maybe it would be good to find out why, and address that rather than just trying to clobber them until the next election. It just seems like,
exactly.
Come on, folks, we can do better than that.
It's a pendulum. Pendulum swinging back and forth between. It's a pendulum.
Yeah, well, there's different levels of that whole pendulum swinging business. So, in terms of like how movements sometimes push for certain kinds of changes, and then they get what they want for a while, and then everything that was not addressed starts to bubble up to the surface again, and then this is the even when you take away all of the obvious corruption and the whole charade, the whole Truman Show business, just getting back to the fundamentals of how societies have been, when they get polarized, it's like you're driving a car and fighting over the steering wheel, and you're trying not to go over the cliff, but you're constantly jerking the wheel this way, and then the other one jerks it the other way, and it looks like this drunken weave down the road, and this is not confidence inspiring, I gotta say. Being
Yeah,
being a passenger in
absolutely.
that car, no, no, no,
Hmm.
I'm not in favor of that. We gotta,
Yeah.
and I can understand now why some folks have decided in their own way that they would rather that the whole issue be removed from human control, and or from the control of, let's say, tribes, who are
Hmm.
constantly locked in struggle. Um,
Yeah.
that could, and of course that could lead to its own kind of dystopian outcomes. There could be both positives and negatives to it, and um, uh, when we're looking at science fiction, the Philip K. Dick world in particular, I think that well, we might be some elements of it might become realized, and hopefully we'll then recognize it when it actually becomes reality and go, well, no, you know what? We'd rather not. Now that it's actually in front of us, no, no thanks. And it's just a question of how soon that reaction occurs.
Yes.
And I would say that if you want some signs of hope, then it has to do with when things appear before our eyes and we decide collectively, no, actually, we'd rather not. The sooner we can do that, the sooner we can actually get through this whole, cyberpunk dystopia, and perhaps organize society along completely novel, untried lines that might actually work, and that don't even require us to be perfect. Because I don't, even though I do believe that people are capable of transforming in quite profound ways in one lifetime, or and uh, the reality benders has to do with that whole notion of the cult is really a, a lot of it has to do with uh, effecting radical self transformation. That's one of the the
Hmm.
selling points, right? Um, the fact is that we're not going to all transform. Some of us are just going to continue being ordinary folks, and we're just going to, hopefully hope that somebody knows what they're doing, and the rest of us will go along with it up to a point. It will never be. And in fact, one of the saving graces of humanity is that we're innately not all easy to control. I mean, there might be some
Yes.
efforts at mind control, and there might be there might be considerable progress, unfortunately, in that direction. But um, uh, to be human means that we're actually never really going to all be in lockstep. It just doesn't work that way, and um, And I would hope that if people are going to have conflicts, that at least they're going to have at least a sense of humor about it, you know, not not just kind of like have this be completely consumed by rage, because it might actually be more
Yes.
healthy. And this is something that maybe it'll emerge in my writing too, is that um, a lot of what we think of as, um, like our attitude towards the people in power, whoever they are, the ones that we can see and the ones we don't see. Um,
Hmm.
th- that whole notion of authority, it's like it's completely it's insubstantial as a dream. I mean, you could literally laugh it out of existence if people just sort of decided to just, I mean, and even though, yeah, sometimes humor can be a little cruel. Well, sometimes the people in power deserve it, that that they
Absolutely.
do deserve to be mocked. just laugh them out of the room if they're just being completely ludicrous and insane. Well, you know, I mean, I feel like we're all living in an open air loony bin, and the inmates are in charge,
Outpatient.
and
Yeah, exactly.
well, it does beg the question, of course, if you ever were to effect a revolution in the loony bin, well, you'd have new loonies in charge then, and there's always that's another aspect of, if I talk about speculative fiction, part of it is not just about technology, it is about society, about people in groups, and if you had a changing of the guard and new people in it, and you still had the same kind of power structure, would it not revert back? Even if you had fresh people in, wouldn't it just revert back eventually to a copy of what it was before? Somehow there has to be some kind of transformation that's beyond simply, I mean, yeah, it is necessary to get some people out, particularly if they're seriously mentally unfit. Yeah, get them out, but there has to be something else something to fill the void, and that actually is, effective and not simply, this kind of, a figurehead. And I guess that will all, in this timeline, we'll soon find out. We won't have to wait very long. And some folks think that we could be in this could be the year of living dangerously. Did you see that movie? You remember the Year of Living Dangerously?
A long time ago, I saw it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that was a very apt title. I think we could apply that to anytime, right now or next year,
Yes.
And
The last 3 years.
yeah, well, if we're in that situation where the world as we know it is just completely gone, completely topsy-turvy, then that means more than ever you kind of have to keep your cool, not freak out.
Mm-hmm.
Just, and you might have to just devise your own local responses. It doesn't have to have anything to do with, authority figures telling you what you ought to do. You might just have to figure it out on your own. Just what happens to work at the moment. You're using your best judgment. I mean, that's what I'm going to do. Because nobody knows, and this is something that I don't know how long we're going to be talking today, but one idea that I don't think this is very controversial, and maybe it is in some circles, but we do live in a world of illusion. It's built upon agreements, which can change at any moment. Yeah. There's a consensus reality that there's the underpinning of our whole society depends upon people believing the same things because they're useful. And one thing that I think is almost unquestioned, and it ought to be, and maybe it will be, is that my feeling is that forms of stored wealth they're all illusory. They're in the sense that the wealth exists only in the minds of those who believe that it exists. Once you have actually, in other words, there are things that are actually useful, the food, the clothes on your back, the products that people make with their hands. Those things are real. You can barter those things, and you could say, you give them value. Each of us gives those things value as long as they're useful, I mean, when the lettuce goes rotten, well, you toss it out. It's not worth anything. But while it's fresh, it's worth something, right? So that's pretty easy to agree upon in the sense of, but you don't necessarily turn that into an abstraction, some kind of medium of exchange. Every medium of exchange involves people agreeing that it's worth something.
Yeah.
And that you can trade it for those other things that are actually things that you can eat and you can wear and you can use. And I just go, yeah, we have there's this enormous edifice, a superstructure built upon the real world, which is all about those symbolic forms of wealth and growing them. They have their life of their own. There's like, stocks and bonds and dollars and all the other currencies and the cryptocurrencies and the NFT and the NFTs and the cryptocurrencies are like the most vaporous, the most, they're most obviously illusory. They're completely driven by psychology, and
electricity.
Like, if you believe in fairies, clap your hands and the currency will go up. And I just go, come on, folks. Is this really necessary? I mean, especially you look at the amount of attention that these things are, they're drawing people's attention and energy to try to grow these things that are they're just completely imaginary, and I know what it's like. I know what it's like to be an investor. And of course, people, might think they're investing in something solid like real estate. Well, have you seen? And then, of course, then they start worrying about the numbers and they look at the figures and, oh, no, the values are going down. And it's like, then suddenly you're miserable because the chart says, oh, no, the thing that you had is declining or it's not going to, it's not going up as the way it's supposed to go up. And I just go,
so
man,
ridiculous.
Just cool it. Look at what you're doing here. Look at your, you see? And I just go, can we possibly have a healthier, more grounded relationship with stuff that gets us through life, And is surely that, and look at, if we look at this as like, this is built into the gameplay here. Okay. Maybe, I don't know, maybe.
Exactly.
I understand that we have to, it's like the terms of the game, the whole running of the civilization seems to run upon being able to quantify things.
Yeah.
And
determine absolutely.
That if and then, of course, it always hinges upon the assumption that our relationships are all, they're all about transactions. And we haven't even fully explored the alternatives. That maybe a different mindset. Just trying it on for size here. I mean, I was saying I'm not making prescriptions, but supposing people were to try just a different mindset about, why they're here, what they are doing, how they're contributing, and then, supposing you were to just take the position. And this is like being so idealistic. I could understand anybody going, oh, come on, there's no way. But supposing you were to just take the position that your life, every day of your life is a gift. And then your mission is to take that gift and to give it to somebody else or to, the world at large in whatever way you can. And then your whole society is about giving gifts to each other just freely, just because you can. And holy cow, that just raises the vibration like way beyond, you give me this and I'll give you that. If it's like, wow, that just shifted things quite a bit. But that's just one example. It's not the only,
I
would
think
have
that's
to
a very
say
major example.
We're living in a period which I consider to be a great privilege. Some people might be freaking out, but I'm actually, honestly, I'm starting to think like it's an amazing. I'm not going to say lucky, but I'm going to say that it is. If you look at it the right way, it is quite a remarkable thing that we're here right now, where we are right now. It's. Other people might be looking on and kind of this horror, like, do you not realize how much danger you're in? But yeah, yeah. Well, we're all going to die eventually. It's just that, what are you going to do
Yeah,
before then? You know?
exactly.
Um, well,
Exactly.
yeah, we've only got X amount of time, every one of us, and regardless of whether you're
Hmm.
old or young or whatever, we're, it's very, it goes quickly. And,
Very quickly.
and I'm a pretty lazy guy in terms of time management. That's like, I, I started, and I look at my life and I go, oh my God, I could have gotten things done so much earlier. And it's like, what's my excuse? I don't have one. Uh, you could say late bloomer, but that's that's kind of a reach right there. But some things I do recognize that maybe, just maybe, we each have just enough time. Not a lot, but maybe if it's just enough, then that's okay. You know,
Yeah, no, I agree.
and
Well, if
regardless of how much time you actually have left, it might be just enough. There might be
mhm,
just a built-in
yeah,
rightness about that, which you know that hopefully provides some consolation. So,
no, I love that concept. I think that's perfect. If as long as you don't allow yourself to slide into one extreme or another, and you're trying to strike a balance, an example would be in the Tao Te Ching,
yeah,
where you eat before you're starving, and
yeah,
then you stop eating before you're just miserably full, just to keep the cycle turning and not swing to one extreme or another. I think that's balance. I really do think that that's the key. And what we see in our society, that what we've been talking about, the pendulum swinging to one extreme or another,
uh-huh.
that's the way that we're conducting things. It ensures that that thing is going to keep going back and forth. But
Yeah,
I think the idea is to make the pendulum irrelevant.
hmm
Like, let's
hmm
get out of that paradigm altogether.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, if I were looking at it from an interpersonal point of view, and this is the first thing that comes up, is that
Hmm.
um, part of the fragmentation comes from the fact that we tend to um, our connections, our direct, the ones that we sustain, tend to be with
Yeah.
people who are already like ourselves,
Yes.
and that's natural. I understand that it's a totally natural thing. It is
Hmm.
actually perhaps there are times, if not continuously, there are at least times when it is beneficial to mingle with people who are different, sufficiently different that you actually have to
Yes.
look at things from a new point of view to understand them.
Hmm.
And this is
Yeah.
something that our society has been lacking for a while now. And
Absolutely.
when I conceived of the story, the reality benders, I knew that I had to that I wanted to have military people represented, and that is
Hmm.
including in a flashback battle scene, which is I had to do some serious research for that too because it's I'm not personally trained in I wasn't um, I'm not myself a veteran, so I cannot talk from firsthand experience about these things.
Hmm.
But I had to learn
Sure.
about that, and then realizing the mindset that is required to uh, to do those things, to make those things happen. You really do, in a sense. Our whole society is made up of these subgroups with a particular mindset, a particular worldview, because of the things that they do. And if we were personally acquainted with, for instance, the people who farm, who actually till the soil and make our food, or pick the vegetables or whatever, or raise the livestock, our
Hmm.
if we actually knew them personally, would actually alter our perspective quite a bit about
Yeah.
people who live in the
Yes.
country. If you live in the city, you might have this very insulated, very detached view of all the systems going on in the background that support your way of life. And this is I think, a failing of our society, that we haven't bridged those gaps between all of these different groups that make the world go round. And
Yes.
and obviously, even though I'm familiar with military, the mindset and people in it, I would say that I'm not glorifying it. It's not the same thing. In fact, there are quite a
Yeah.
few veterans who have been through a lot of extreme unpleasantness, both during and after their time in service. And they also have become quite disenchanted with the whole system, the thing that, that
Mm-hmm.
they have to, of course, each in their own way has to process what just happened to them to make sense of it, so that they can go on living with themselves. It's a very individual thing. Some people
Yeah.
really become quite radicalized by the experience. Others people might become, let's say, they might gaslight themselves into making sure that they don't, their worldview doesn't crack, even though it is already, and even people who were, let's say, really marginalized. And this is a subgroup. There's always this, and unfortunately, this is built in now. There's like this whole segment of our society that is has broken, psychologically, emotionally broken enough that they're not even participating. They don't even have a role. They're just sort of and that includes a large number of homeless and drug addicts who are filling up the cities all over. There's a significant enough that you would have to count them as part of, the underclass, the untouchables, the caste system. We have that now. We have an untouchable class. This is something that is, maybe it was always there, but we know that they are there, but we're also not really engaging with them. Not in the most, it's more like just keep them at arm's length.
Exactly.
There may be, for all we know, there might be some very deep and visionary people in that mix that we don't even know about. They might be former mental patients, or, present day mental patients, for all we know. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not saying there are, but I wouldn't be surprised. There might, you might recall that in ancient Greek history, there was a philosopher named Diogenes, who quite famously was, I consider him like a freak, in the sense that he really did not fit in. He was a teacher, sure. He had people who were, paid attention to him, but he was really not interested in playing the game of, being a professional philosopher. He was just not into it. He would rather just, he was living on the street, basically. And, but people knew about him. That was the most amazing thing about Greek society at that time. They would actually pay attention to a guy who was, living in rags, and it was either a wine cask or a wine barrel, something huge that he could just, use as his shelter. I guess today it would be more like a tent or a cardboard box,
Exactly.
But imagine that. We don't have anything like that. We don't have any place for people like that. And we can't even get our heads around that possibility today. But here I am. I just said that. And it's like, there's almost certainly somebody just like that somewhere,
Of course. Yeah.
The world is big enough that that's absolutely a possibility, that you could have
For sure.
geniuses out there who are just completely unrecognized, completely in obscurity, completely shunned by the world. They're out there. Somebody might recognize that someday.
Yeah.
This is, again, part of that world of fantastic possibilities. Even amidst all of the suffering and all of the hardships, that there are endless possibilities, and you just have, and it might help to roll with that rather than feeling threatened by it. Just sort of kind of go, okay, the great game, as it were, has the potential of becoming much more than it is now. But you also then have to accept a certain degree of unpredictability, that it's not going to operate by the same rules that it used to. In fact, it might seem more anarchistic than it used to.
Yes.
And and indeed, it might be that we're not. People have been afraid, if they're projecting their fears of the future, of tyrannies, they're always hearkening back to some earlier era, the thinking that it's going to be like the 1930s, when fascism and Nazism came. But I have a feeling that it's not going to be like a repeat. It's if anything, given the quality of people nowadays, it's more likely to be a kind of a farce, where some people might be trying to enact stuff like that, but it will fail because they just don't have the competence. They can't. They won't be able to. That's one of the again, the pros and cons of living in this era. You almost could wish that there really was a breakaway civilization where all the competent people were, but I sure don't see them around here. I mean, I'm looking at San
They're
Francisco.
not going to show themselves.
Yeah, I mean, maybe like there might have been a brain drain. Then they just left all the meatheads in charge of the surface world because they don't care anymore. They just and I just go, wow, geez, I don't know if that's where if emotional intelligence might actually have come in handy to try to make up for that, because we might have to become more patient and more compassionate, just knowing that, we're dealing with incompetence here, and we can't really, we're just going to have to adapt, and that people do all over the world, in other parts of the world that are less developed. It's astonishing what, they don't, yes, they could get aggravated, but they decided not to get too worked up about it, because they just know, this is just the way it is these days. And then, although obviously there are things that are hard to tolerate, and I would, like at the very minimum, you'd like to feel at least that you can get through your day safely, and get back home, and that certain things are going to stay relatively predictable. That's the hard part. We don't know. It might be the kind of thing where, just like the utilities, we would expect that, or the food supply, right? Basic stuff. We would like those to be consistent. But in parts of the world, this is not a given, and we might, in that sense, get a taste of that here and there. Just like when right now, like, there are parts of this country which are experiencing natural disasters, whether it's, flood or tornadoes or, hurricanes or whatever, or massive heat waves, and things just sort of like start breaking down, and under those circumstances, people, they understand this is the way it is, and then they, the better ones start cooperating, because rather than getting selfish, they start becoming generous, because that's how you get through that, and so hopefully, let's be optimistic, and I'm being an optimist here. I'm going to say that in times of crisis, people start to show what they're made of, and they're not all,
Absolutely.
that's what people do. People have done this all throughout history. I don't think that we've changed or degraded so much that that's not going to happen. I think that, and again, one of the interesting questions about, that comes up in Reality Benders, it's like the whole question of, well, how much influence do each of us have over the future that we experience? It's not like each of us have godlike powers. I certainly don't claim anything like that, but if to each of us, and this is a question, I mean, you may have your own tentative answer about it. How much do each of us actually influence the collective experience, the timeline that we're all living on, without even having to, let's say, perform tangible actions? I mean, it could be tangible actions, but even if we're cultivating a certain mindset or performing spiritual practices, are we actually affecting things invisibly? Do you think, I don't know, you might have an opinion about that.
I absolutely do think that we do. And I think that, I believe in the Buddhist concept of interconnectedness. Everything is interconnected. We live in a very conditional reality, so we are part of that condition for each other. So if you step out of your house and you're screaming at the top of your lungs, and you walk into stores and you're just nasty to people, it's a very tangible way of seeing your effect on the outside world. But you can even do that without intangibly, just by the way you walk, or go walking by somebody who's a very empathetic person, which I think on some level we all are to a greater or lesser degree. And just like maybe the way you're clenching your jaw, or the way that you just look at somebody, you communicate something, and then that sends a ripple out. That may affect somebody adversely, and then they pass that on to their kid or their mother or their pet or whatever, and it just keeps branching out. So I think that those are small ways, but I think those can lead to bigger ways too. And I think maybe with the more intention and consciousness and awareness that you bring to it, possibly you can do that in bigger ways also. That's my take.
Yeah. It is pretty mysterious, and
it is.
Given that, what we have to go by in terms of looking at, if we were trying to read the state of how things are, well, we're getting everything, practically everything, we're getting secondhand, filtered,
yes,
so to speak. I mean, yes, we can walk around we can walk around the neighborhood, we can talk to people we know in person. That's one form of perception. It's not, but there's so much else that we're receiving from, through, for instance, through our trusty internet here. And it's like a funhouse mirror. We really don't know how much, whether this truly reflects what's going on with people, actual people like us out there, even just down the street. I mean, you don't have to go very far to realize you don't know anybody around here, in the neighborhood. Really, it's the strangest feeling. But then again, we've grown up in cities. We know what that's like. Well, I just try to imagine what it's like even in other countries. People have opinions about places that they've never even been to, which I think is just so funny.
Exactly.
And there's like folks who are spouting opinions every day about, some country on the other side of the world that is supposedly our enemy or our rival. And do they know anybody personally? is even
No.
from any of those. I mean, no, I just think that is funny that we're that's why I tend to, in a way, it helps to have these days in particular, to have a healthy skepticism about virtually everything that comes to us secondhand. I mean, I
Yes.
never thought I'd be living in an era where I'd even have to doubt the authenticity of photographs that are,
Yeah.
I mean, now you really do have to look at pictures and videos and ask yourself, is that real? Has that been,
Yes.
I mean,
It's insane.
because it's, we shouldn't have to do that, but then again, this is just part of the mix now. Um,
Exactly.
and
It's a real
I could
time.
understand why it might be a natural reaction to um, actually turn one's attention elsewhere, back to the real
Hmm.
world. That's why that's part of the reason I went on about gardening, because even though, yes,
Yeah.
gardening itself has tangible benefits like organic
Hmm.
produce, okay,
Yes.
that's not a small thing. That's a big thing, especially with the cost of food nowadays. But
Yeah. Yeah.
also that there is a benefit just from the action, the act of doing it. The act, it's its
Indeed.
own reward. It really. So you might find something equally beneficial. There are many other activities, and undoubtedly, that produce that sense of connectedness.
Hmm.
If you're going to, I mean, if, we don't have to introduce more layers of illusion into the game. The fundamental illusion is quite sufficient.
Yeah.
and, um, goodness, and also, every time you're engaged in any kind of relationship, I think, whether it's with an activity or with a thing or a person, or it's going to draw some qualities out of you that you didn't know you had.
Yeah.
You may actually discover you have a skill then that
Hmm.
actually gets better with practice. You know, I mean, one of the coolest things. I mean, this is like years ago. Okay, I don't know. Do you play any musical instruments, or you or Hunter? Because I can tell you that
I
music
I've
or
dabbled.
doing anything that involves some expertise, a
Hmm.
path of mastery, in other words, or for
Hmm.
fun. Okay, I'm not saying that everybody should be like doing some really hard grind. Okay, sometimes just learning how to play is like the one of the best things, even if there's no tangible, obvious benefit. That's why,
Hmm.
um, I can't, even though, people could criticize gaming um, as a kind of like a waste of time, like it's this, especially because the technology is like sucking you in. It doesn't mean that
Hmm.
play itself is a bad thing. Play is a very good thing.
Yeah.
In fact,
Yes.
you could say that, when I'm scribbling in my notebook and creating weird tales from the universe next door, that's a form of play.
Oh
It's
yeah.
I'm
Absolutely.
and if you want to take that metaphor, if you're gonna be if you're here in the great game, then play your heart out. You know, it's like, what else are you here for? You're gonna just be a spectator? Surely not.
Hmm.
Isn't this an
Yeah.
opportunity that, it may not come again? I mean, I don't know. I think about, we've talked about what happens to people after they're gone. You know, do
Hmm.
they, does personhood persist? Do we keep all of the memories and go somewhere with them? God knows what we would do with all of that stuff. I mean, there are people who lose their memories before they die, if you know.
Hmm. Yeah.
Do people with dementia get all their memories back after they die? I don't know about that. I mean, um, it's like uh, it's like if you die in a game, do you keep all your XP, or is it does it all get reset back to zero? and you have to start all over. I don't know. The whole notion of selfhood, I really do call it into question, not because I don't care. It's not because immortality doesn't matter. It's just that any kind of existence seems to presuppose that it's all a larger context. And I don't, and you know, if we, in other words, you being you, and has to do with you're living in a particular body with particular memories and circumstances in a particular place with particular relationships. And if you get removed from that context, completely removed, out of your body, out of that place, away from all of that other stuff, what's left to, that matters, that where your personhood actually matters?
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly it's like, why would you continue being that person? What purpose would that serve? It might be preserved, but you're, in the sense that there might be a recording of you. I like to think of this metaphorically as like the box of tapes that, remember, showing my age here. Remember we all had like cassettes all piled up in a jumble?
I had 8-tracks. Yeah.
Yeah, 8-tracks or cassettes, right? And some of them you would listen to again, and some of them you'd forget about. And maybe, maybe that's where our experiences all go. We all, end up in the box of tapes, right? And it requires somebody being there, living the life, in order for that music to be played. Somebody's got to be there to listen to it. If nobody's there, well, then maybe the impulse would be to be somebody else, do something else. Doesn't even have to be on this planet. I was remembering to the extent that Buddhists talk about stuff like reincarnation, right? And one of the lamas, I think it was Tai Sita Rinpoche. He was in the regent of the Kagyu lineage. He was given a talk years and years and years ago about, and he had just offhandedly said, any of you talking to us, any of you could have had a past life in another galaxy. Or you could have your future life in another galaxy. And it's like, we all just sort of like go, oh, wow. Yeah, we never thought of it. A lot of us don't think of it that way, but, there's...
Yeah.
Who said that there was some limit? Like we're all kind of like bound to stick around here, especially if we don't, we might feel a connection to people. Maybe feeling connected, we might want to connect again. I understand that.
Yeah.
But supposing you actually had more options than that, or you might get, maybe there's some selection process. It's like, who knows? There might be some spiritual advisors on the other side who say, you know what, you might be qualified to go over to that galaxy. Would you be interested? And it'll be different. Let me tell you, it'll be really, really different. It's not going to be like Earth at all. At all. You game? Why do I have to think about that? I'd have to see a brochure or something at least, okay?
Exactly. Before I sign off.
It'd be like, being able to join Starfleet or something, And again, getting back to science fiction, it's like, I don't know about you, if you grew up on the same kind of 1960s TV shows that I did, like Star Trek.
Oh, yeah.
And The Outer Limits and The Twilight Zone. And that, talk about formative experiences. This is like, I didn't even know, the nature of living in what might be a golden age is that you don't know it until later, that was the golden age. And it's like, you could find fault. We all do. But then again, as far as, when you're a kid and you're being exposed to stuff that's really way out, and it's like a complete mix. Some of it's optimistic and some of it's kind of like foreboding. and some of it's
Hmm.
just there to, you know, creep you out. And I just go, wow, we had like a cornucopia, you know. And if I were looking at uh, aside from Star Trek, you know, which I think was the more optimistic, really, you know, very showing humanity at its best a lot of the time,
Hmm.
which I thought
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
that's one of the best things about it. But also in terms of imagination, you know, I was looking at, I'm remembering the Twilight Zone in particular as, um, whereas Outer Limits was more traditional science fiction in terms of how we think of it, the
Hmm.
Twilight Zone was covering like a range of genres all at once, you know, supernatural
Hmm.
horror and science
Yes.
fiction and fantasy. It was really, you know,
Hmm.
you just wouldn't know what you were getting from one week to the next. And I think that, um, and there was always uh, this air of this high strangeness, and coming out of, you know, when the culture was coming out of the 1950s to encounter this, you know, and that influence continued through the 1960s. It was really quite remarkable. This was
Oh
like
yeah.
this catalyst uh, that I think was needed, and it was that degree of imagination was a response to the times that we were living in.
Hmm.
And if you know anything about Rod Serling, um, I think that a lot of his creativity was partly driven by traumatic experiences in his life. He had been in World War II as a paratrooper and had seen a lot of, you know, quite awful things. He was in the Pacific Theater, and uh, I don't know if he was interested in weird fiction prior to the war, but he certainly got into it after the war. And it might have been his creativity, his path of creativity might have been partly um, triggered by or a response to the things that he had been through. And
Hmm. That
this
makes sense.
happens this happens a lot actually. So um, I think that a factor that can't be denied, and I think this is again, it's just like one of the wonders of the human condition, is that um, some very very valuable people might actually be uh, have display the qualities that they do as a response to being broken in some way.
Yeah.
This
Absolutely.
happens a lot where, you know, and this also is a factor in the story, the reality benders. I've, you know, have I can't really speak about cults from firsthand experience, but
Hmm.
in general, you know how it is that certain groups or movements um, have a tendency to attract certain kinds of people who might be, you know, um, might have issues, let's say, are
Yes.
there, who were attracted to this because of this
Hmm.
broken quality that they share in common.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they
Hmm.
might do now, either they're going to be on a path of healing, the or the organization might be quite dysfunctional and exploiting that broken quality in a negative
Hmm.
way. But if they're on a path of healing, well, that's together, and that their association is helping. Well, that's a different story. And if people are being creative together, that's really that could be. There's no telling what can happen. You know, you have to allow for a certain degree of uh, eccentricity, I suppose. Um,
For sure.
I mean, I have no doubt that if things go well with this book and any books that follow, that I'll be I might have some interesting encounters, you know, with people who might, want to work with me on adaptations or
Yeah.
something. I'd be fine with that.
Yeah.
I mean, as long as I can stay healthy and attentive and, recognize, distinguish between, what is a good opportunity, because that's, sci I can tell you, I don't know if Hunter's been in show business, but I don't know if you personally
Mhm.
have associations
I have
with.
not. No.
Okay. Well, it's a mixed bag, let's say. They're all
Hmm.
made of, it's all human beings. They come from all different places. And it's a wonder. It's a wonder what all of these, they're, you have to be kind of peculiar to be in show business to begin with,
Yes.
okay? And so,
That's the impression I get.
yeah. So, the ones who are good at playing well with others tend to thrive. And,
Hmm.
um, I hope to if those opportunities come, that I'll be ready to play well with them, um, and not the only thing I could say I have going for me is that I'm not too hung up on the supposed rewards. I mean, I care about
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
quality of the stuff, the story itself.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
people might have to worry about the money part if I'm not going to worry about it. Um, I hope that I can delegate properly that way, if that's how it turns out. Um, and I'm more interested in maintaining the vibe in terms of, if people are working together, that we all share that motivation, the highest
Hmm.
motivation, because that tends to produce, in general, I don't want to make big pronouncements about reality, but in general, the quality of the outcome is influenced by the quality of the motivation. That usually it's pretty
Oh
reliable.
yeah.
Okay. I mean,
Hmm.
it's like physics. There's certain there are certain principles you can pretty well rely upon. So and that's why I feel blessed right now that if there's anything I've got circumstances that enable me to write, and for the first time in my life, I have control over my time in a way that I never had before. It's a
Fantastic.
it's a condition that I wish everyone had, at least for part of
Hmm.
their life. They ought to be able to just wake up and have complete choice, freedom of choice of how they spend their day. It's it's the it's I don't know if there are parallels in earlier societies, before the clock was invented. Imagine a world before the clock, before people,
Yeah.
decided we all have to get up at this hour and then do this here and this here and this here. And then
Yes.
it's a little bit more like being a hunter-gatherer, or like,
Yeah.
ancient agrarian societies where, people just sort of got
Hmm.
up whenever they got up, and if they had things to do together, then they just get together and, well, here we go. And then when they got it done, they were done. It wasn't as though, well, no, you have to stick around until 5 o'clock. No, no, nobody was. If you got
Yeah.
it done, you're done. And you go,
Exactly.
my God,
I love it.
who wouldn't want to live that way? I mean, really.
Yeah.
Um, who knows if we'll find a way back to, I'm not saying we're going to go back to the Garden of Eden, okay? But we might find a way to organize our lives differently, so it's not, we're not feeling like cogs in a machine. Um,
Yes.
because that's not been, you look at why is there so much misery? Well, part of it, even if you're not suffering deprivation and your country's not, being bombed into rubble, there's so many ways that people make themselves miserable just from daily life. And I think, wow.
Yes.
And when I'm storytelling, I'm including daily life. I don't think of that as trivial. The, the there are sometimes these little happenstance events that happen in the course of your day might actually turn out to have some significance. There might,
For sure.
the little conversations that you might have that you weren't even planning to have.
Mm-hmm.
And it might turn out that this might have some effect later on down the road on somebody, maybe you, maybe the other person. It's just, and I just go,
Okay.
wow. All I can say is that if you're here, then, like I said, it's if you want to take the attitude of that it's a game and you're here to play, then wow, that's a huge advantage. I don't know if it might not be easy to get to. Quite a lot of folks know about the grinding part. That's about it. Where if it's
Mm-hmm.
there might be a way to balance it out, and an attitude shift is just part of it. It might be that
Yes.
it took me a long time. If I look back at I can't just talk about me as a writer. I was grinding away as a temp and a file clerk for years and years and years. Total obscurity,
Mm-hmm.
at or below the poverty line, and no end in sight. Nothing that tells me that this is like there's some pathway here. There was no
Yeah.
pathway. It was just like I was just making it up
Mm-hmm.
as I went, showing up. Just all I did was show up and put in the work. I can't even imagine. Well, it could have continued. It could have been continued. In other timelines, I'm no doubt that I'm still doing that. It
Mm-hmm.
just happens that this one I'm not. So I'm going to try to make the best of it. But for all we know, that everybody who is in the grind right now may at some point find themselves in different circumstances and they won't even know how the hell, it might not even be a plan. It might be happenstance.
Yeah.
And if other people
Yeah.
make a plan and it actually turns out, wow, that's terrific. How to escape from the matrix. If it might turn out that there are multiple pathways out of the matrix.
For
And
sure.
it depends upon where you are at. This is like the level, the playing field we're on is enormous. It has so many nooks and crannies that, the
Yes.
rest of us know, most of us know nothing about.
Mm-hmm.
We only know the little part that we're occupying. And
Yeah. The little part of the maze.
It might very well be. Goodness knows. Have you had chance encounters? People, people you just met who that meeting turned out to be more significant than you could have predicted.
Yeah.
And it's not just
Mm-hmm.
meeting the love of your life. Okay. That's one. That's memorable, by the way. I'm sure that, both you and Hunter remember the moment you first met,
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
right? Well, there are encounters like that are either as significant or almost as significant as that in each of our lives. And it's just and it may not even have to do with the content, how it develops from there. The significance might be just that one day. Just that one day, that one encounter itself might be the catalyst. Isn't that amazing? This is just how it is.
It is.
And
Yeah, I agree.
anyway, I don't know if we have. I'm going to take a quick look at my notes, but I think that most of the really key stuff has been covered in terms of what I was planning to talk about. Now, if there's anything pops into your head from the quantum realm in your brain, please go ahead because I'm game. I'm
was
only half
planning on
kidding about the quantum
planning.
realm in your brain, by the way. I, I mean, I've been hearing
Actually,
stuff.
I'm getting messages from the bladder realm. That's for sure.
Oh, okay.
No, I was going to. I mean, I usually cap uh, episodes out at around 2 hours.
Oh, well,
So
I
we
didn't know.
are, yeah.
Well,
No,
you
no,
can.
no, no problem whatsoever. No, it's been a fantastic conversation for sure.
Yeah.
But
Well, I hope that
uh,
you
I
can do some creative editing too. I mean, because I mean, you
oh
can.
no, 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 no. That's usually just a vague skeleton that I work with. I set the length of the show. I can make it as long or as short as I
Yeah.
want to. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well,
going an extra
in case
hours.
it gets repetitive, you can always make sure a good points don't have to be restated half a dozen different
Oh
ways.
no, 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 no. I don't like to edit conversations. I like to
Okay.
keep
Well,
everything
I
in
mean,
there.
I've
So
had some
yeah,
fun
then it
here.
becomes
I mean, I'm telling
yeah.
you.
I have too.
I mean, I hope it
And
hasn't been too one-sided, man. I don't know. I just
oh
get
no,
carried
not at
away.
all.
Okay.
Yeah, and no, you've got fantastic things to say, and I love your insights, and I love hearing about your book, and I'm very excited to actually get a chance to read it.
Yeah, well, I
Any
have more
vague,
confidence now about I'm over a year in and I'm about more than halfway past the halfway point in terms of
fantastic,
the writing. So I'm very confident it's going to get published by, well, if not the end of this year, then the beginning of next year. And if I have to self-publish, I'll do that. But I'm going to try to get it through a regular publisher first. We'll see what
good,
happens.
good,
Because
yeah, yeah.
but I will self-publish if I have to. I mean, it's easier to do now than it used to be. So
hmm I know a couple actually that have a really really wonderful publishing house. It's not a big, it's not Macmillan's or anything like that, but they do really really good work. If you get to the point where that sounds interesting to you, if you try other things and they're not working out, let me know and I can hook you up with them.
yeah, that's cool. I mean,
Yeah,
I would not be surprised if it turns out that personal connections turn out produce results that more than the mainstream
yeah,
world where I don't know anybody. Um, so
exactly.
yeah, but and hopefully civilization holds together long enough too. I'm going to be
It will.
optimistic that we
Yes.
will still live in a world where yes, you can go buy books and read them in peace.
Uh, ex-
Um,
that's where I'm putting my eggs. Yes.
yeah, yeah. I don't think that's asking too much. Yeah. I mean,
I don't think so
right
either.
now, it's not like we have a meteor heading our way, not that I know of. We just have human beings to deal with. And if they just, if
Exactly.
cooler heads prevail, we can continue living our daily
Yes.
lives. That's not, it's not a tall order. It just happens that, you know, things are just kind
It's
of
not a big ask.
overheated right now. We actually
Exactly.
people have so much more in
Cycles.
common than they are different. So
I totally agree.
yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna get going. I'm gonna make
Okay.
dinner. I think I have tacos on my mind, so I think that's not a bad
Fantastic.
idea. And I wish you well, and
Well,
give my compliments to
likewise.
I would love to see Hunter next time, and when the book comes
Uh-huh.
out, and
Yeah.
uh, I'm really
But
grateful for this
before you
opportunity. Yes.
likewise, I'm very honored to have you on. But before you leave, maybe you can tell people where they can find you and your work online.
Oh, okay. Well, there is this blog on Substack called the Open
Hmm.
Sanctum, and I maybe when you post this, you can put the URL in the description. But I could also
Absolutely.
kind of spell it out. It's because it's fairly, Substack blogs are pretty straightforward. The format,
Hmm.
you know, it starts Open Sanctum, one word, opensanctum.substack.com.
Okay.
Simple as that. And
Fantastic.
then, people can either subscribe for free or not. It's, There's no bars to reading any of the material. It's all free. So,
Fabulous.
as far as publishing is concerned, that's a separate thing. If it turns out that there's a reason to publish fiction online, that's, I'll cross that bridge when I get there. But right now, I'm just going to see about, good old fashioned books. I would really love to be able to, hold a book in my hand with a cover art on it, the reality benders.
Yeah.
That would be
exactly.
That would feel good. I'm not going to lie. I would be kind of chuffed if that happens. It's going to happen.
Absolutely.
So
yeah,
anyway,
it's going to happen. Let's call it into existence.
Huh?
Likewise.
Yeah, thank you.
Likewise.
And
I wish you well too.
Really, this has been enriching, and it is encouraging just knowing that, folks like you are out there and keep doing this. Seriously, you're doing the right thing.
Thank you.
Keep doing this. I like this, what you're this whole podcast idea. So,
well, I appreciate that. That means a lot coming from you. So I appreciate your kind words. If you could I could just ask you to leave your browser window open until the audio and the video finishes uploading.
Yeah,
that
I
would be
hope
fantastic.
I didn't do anything that interfered with that. As far as
no,
I don't have to do anything. Just let it sit. Right? Is that what you mean?
Just let it be, and it should let you know when it's all done.
Okay, I can do that. I keep things. I can keep the computer on as long as it's necessary, and the internet is constantly on usually. And so,
cool. I can send you an email when it's done, and just so you know, and you can shut it down.
I remember. It sometimes takes a while, so I'm okay with that.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm going to get going. And
all right, Wayne.
Take care. Have a lovely evening. Say hi to Hunter for me. And
I will do that.
Okay.